Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the vast windswept world of the 13th century Mongol Steppe place, where your entire house can be packed onto a cart, your breakfast comes from a horse, and the horizon never seems to end. You're about to experience a typical day in a nomadic camp where comfort means something entirely different than what you're used to, and where honestly, the learning curve for survival is so steep that most outsiders wouldn't make it past lunch. This isn't the sedentary life of stone walls and planted fields. This is movement, adaptation, and a lifestyle so finely tuned to its environment that it built the largest contiguous land empire in human history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I'm always curious who's out there drifting off to tales of felt tents and fermented horse milk. And now, dim the lights, maybe turn on the fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The darkness inside your Gerfats, the circular felt tent you call home, is absolute in these moments before dawn. Not city darkness where streetlights bleed through curtains, but true steppe darkness, the kind that presses against your closed eyelids. You're lying on a felt mat covered with sheepskins, and you can feel the subtle give of the packed earth beneath you. The air inside the ger is cool, but not cold, held at a comfortable temperature by the banked fire in the central hearth and the remarkable insulation properties of the layered felt walls around you. You don't wake to an alarm. Clock those won't exist for centuries. Instead, your body has learned to recognize the subtle shift in the air that comes just before sunrise, that moment when the steppe holds its breath between night and day. Outside, you can hear the first stirrings of livestock. A horse snorts. Sheep begin their morning bleating, a sound that starts with one or two animals and ripples through the flock like a slow-motion wave of woolly complaint. Your eyes open, adjusting to the darkness. Above you, the ger's wooden roof ribs converge toward the circular smoke hole at the crown, and through that opening you can see a patch of sky, transitioning from deep black to the faintest hint of grey. No stars now. They've already begun to fade as dawn approaches from the east, sweeping across the endless grasslands. You push aside your sheepskin covering and sit up. The movement is quiet, practiced. Others in the ger are still sleeping. Your wife, your children curled together for warmth, possibly your elderly mother in her designated spot on the northern side. The spatial arrangement inside a Mongol ger is not random. Every section has meaning, every position reflects status and purpose. Historians still argue whether these arrangements were purely practical or carried deeper spiritual significance, but either way, you'd never dream of sleeping in the wrong spot. The felt walls around you are thick, multiple layers of compressed wool that repel wind and rain with surprising efficiency. Your people have perfected this portable architecture over centuries, and honestly, your tent is probably more weather-resistant than half the stone houses in Europe right now. The lattice walls can expand or contract, the felt covering can be adjusted for seasons, and the entire structure can be dismantled and loaded onto carts in under an hour. Try doing that with your brick suburban home. You reach for your deal, the long robe that serves as the universal garment for men and women alike on the steppe. Yours is made of thick wool, worn soft from years of use, with a sash that wraps multiple times around your waist. The sash isn't just decorative. It provides crucial lower back support for long hours in the saddle and serves as a convenient place to tuck small items. You pull on your boots, leather affairs with felt lining and upturned toes, a design that makes mounting a horse easier and keeps your feet from slipping through stirrups. Outside, the light is growing. Through the felt door covering, you can see a pale glow. The temperature has dropped during the night. It always does on the steppe, even in summer, and your breath makes small clouds in the air as you move toward the entrance. You push aside the felt flap and step out into the morning. The steppe stretches before you in every direction, an ocean of grass painted in shades of grey and silver by the pre-dawn light. The horizon is impossibly distant, a flat line broken only by the occasional low rise or the dark shapes of other gers scattered across the landscape. Your camp consists of perhaps 15 to 20 households, arranged in a loose cluster that allows for community while giving each family space for their animals. Smoke begins to rise from a few other ger smoke holes as people wake and stoke their fires. The air smells cling grass, earth, animal musk, and that particular clarity that comes with being far from anything resembling a city. A quirky historical detail: Mongol visitors to Chinese cities often complained that the air was too thick and made them feel ill, while Chinese visitors to the steppe complained of the opposite, that the air was too thin and provided insufficient nourishment. Both groups were probably just experiencing culture shock disguised as atmospheric critique. The livestock are beginning their morning routines. Horses stand in loose groups, their breath visible in the cool air. Sheep huddle together, that defensive clustering instinct that makes them simultaneously easy to manage and frustrating to work with. A few goats have already started wandering because goats are going to goat, regardless of what century it is. In the distance you can see the darker shapes of cattle, and beyond them the tall swaying forms of camels, those two-humped Bactrian varieties that can survive both blazing summers and brutal winters. The sky continues to brighten, bands of pale gold now mixing with the grey. You're about to begin another day in a rhythm of life that has sustained your people for generations, a day that will involve milk and meat, leather and felt, horses and bows, movement and stillness. The steppe is waking up, and so are you. You walk toward where the horses are gathered, the grass still wet with dew that soaks the leather of your boots. Several women are already there, moving among the animals with the confidence that comes from performing this task every single morning since childhood. Your wife is among them, already positioning herself beside a mare, and you join the group because milking isn't gendered labor, here it's survival labor, and everyone who's physically capable participates. The mares are surprisingly tolerant of this daily intrusion. They've been bred and trained for generations to accept milking, though they're nowhere near as docile as dairy cattle. A mare produces far less milk than a cow, maybe 2 litres per day, compared to a cow's 20, but mare's milk has properties that make it worth the effort. It's lower in fat, higher in lactose, and when fermented, it becomes something the steppe people consider essential to life itself. You approach a chestnut mare that you've milked dozens of times before. She knows you, which helps, because an unfamiliar person trying to milk a horse is a good way to get kicked into next week. The technique is different from milking cattle or goats. You position yourself on the left side of the mare, near her hindquarters but not directly behind them, because you're not an idiot, and you bring your wooden bucket close. The mare's foal is nearby, and this is actually crucial to the entire process. The foal is allowed to start nursing first, which stimulates the mare's milk letdown reflex. After a minute or so, you gently but firmly move the foal aside. It protests with annoyed whinny sand. You take over. Your hands work the teats with a practiced rhythm, alternating in a pattern that encourages the milk to flow. The liquid comes in spurts, hitting the wooden bucket with a sound that changes pitch as the vessel fills. This is not a quick process. Each mare gives relatively little milk, so you'll move from horse to horse, collecting small amounts from multiple animals. The whole camp will end up with perhaps 20 to 30 litres of mare's milk by the time everyone's finished, and every drop is precious. A mainstream historical fact, the Mongol military campaigns were partially fueled by this milk. Soldiers on the move would open a vein in their horse's neck knot, killing the animal, just taking a small blood donation, mix it with mare's milk, and create a protein-rich beverage that could sustain them for days. Waste not, want not, as they say. Around you, other people are working their own mares. There's a rhythm to it, a collective pattern of movement and sound. Buckets fill slowly. Foals complain and try to sneak back to their mothers. Occasionally, a mare decides she's done with this nonsense and sidesteps away, requiring patient repositioning. Children, too young to milk, effectively run around the edges, learning by watching, getting comfortable with the animals. One of the quirky details that often surprises people, Mongol mare's milk was considered so superior that visitors who mastered the art of milking horses were viewed as having crossed a crucial threshold of civilization. From the Mongol perspective, people who only drank cow's milk were basically barbarians. The Chinese thought this was hilarious, considering they viewed the Mongols as the barbarians, while the Mongols absolutely returned the sentiment. Cultural superiority is always a two-way street, and dairy preferences are apparently a hill many societies choose to die on. Your bucket is perhaps a quarter full now, a whitish liquid that looks thinner than cow's milk and smells faintly sweet. You move to another mare, this one a grey with a suspicious temperament. She tolerates you, barely, but you can feel her muscles tense under your hands. You work quickly, efficiently, knowing that her patience has limits. The sun is fully above the horizon now, casting long shadows across the grass. The temperature is rising, though it's still cool enough that you're comfortable in your wool deal. Other morning activities are beginning around the campfires being stoked, children emerging from gers, the sounds of daily life starting up like an orchestra tuning before a performance. Mare's milk in its fresh state is drinkable, certainly, but that's not what most of it will become. The real magic happens when it ferments into airag, known in other regions as kumis, that mildly alcoholic beverage that's about to become your breakfast. The fermentation happens in leather bags that hang inside the gers, and the liquid must be stirred regularly, hundreds of times per day to keep the fermentation process active and prevent separation. Historians still argue whether the constant stirring was purely practical or had ritual significance, but either way, it's somebody's job to keep agitating that bag, and that somebody is often whoever walks past it. You finish with the grey mare and move to a third, your hands now working almost automatically. This is meditative labour, repetitive but never quite mindless, because horses are unpredictable and a moment of inattention can result in a hoof to the ribs. The bucket grows heavier. Around you, other buckets are filling too, and when everyone's done, the milk will be combined and added to the fermentation bags back at the gears. A young boy, maybe 7 years old, approaches with his own small bucket, determined to contribute. He positions himself beside a patient older mare, and you watch him work with the focused intensity of someone proving they're old enough for real responsibilities. His technique isn't perfect, but it's adequate, and the mare tolerates his less practiced hands. In a few years, he'll be as efficient as any adult. The milking session winds down. You've collected what you're going to get this morning, and the mares are released to graze, their foals reuniting with them in a chaos of maternal reunions. You carry your bucket back toward your gear, the milk sloshing gently with each step. Your wife walks beside you with her own bucket, and together you've gathered perhaps 4 litres of decent morning's work. The grass squelches under your boots. The sun is warm on your face now, that particular quality of steppe sunlight that seems both gentle and relentless at the same time. You're about to turn this fresh milk into something that's part beverage, part sustenance, part social lubricant, and entirely central to life as you know it. Back inside your ger, you pour the fresh mare's milk into a large leather bag that hangs from one of the roof support poles. This bag made from an entire horsehide, carefully cured and sonal ready, contains yesterday's airag, still actively fermenting. The fresh milk joins the older batch, and this continuous addition is actually how the fermentation stays alive. You never empty the bag completely, you always leave some starter culture behind, like a sourdough mother dough that your great-grandmother might have begun decades ago. The bag needs stirring. Actually, it needs stirring about 1,000 times today, give or take a few hundred. You grab the wooden paddle that lives beside each long stick with a flattened end, and you plunge it into the bag, working it up and down, around and around, agitating the liquid inside. The sound is rhythmic, almost hypnotic, slosh, slosh, slosh. Anyone walking past the bag during the day will give it a few dozen stirs, a communal effort that keeps the fermentation active and prevents the milk fats from separating and rising to the top. The fermentation process is actually fascinating from a biochemical standpoint, though obviously you're not thinking about it in those terms. Wild yeasts and lactic acid bacteria in the bag convert the lactose in the mare's milk into alcohol and lactic acid. The result is a beverage that's mildly alcoholic, somewhere between 1 and 3%, with a sour, slightly fizzy quality. It's refreshing, nutritious, and just intoxicating enough to take the edge off daily existence on the steppe, which honestly can be pretty harsh. You dip a wooden ladle into the bag and pour yourself a bowlful. The airag is whitish, somewhat translucent, and when you lift it to your lips, it smells tangy and yeasty. You drink. The taste is sour, effervescent, nothing like the sweet dairy products sedentary cultures prefer. It's an acquired taste, certainly, but you've been acquiring it since childhood, so to you, this is what milk is supposed to taste like. Oh. Fresh, unfermented mare's milk actually seems bland and pointless in comparison. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol armies carried airag in leather flasks during campaigns, and soldiers would drink it throughout the day for hydration, calories, and that mild buzz that made long rides more bearable. European observers were utterly baffled by this practice, unable to understand why anyone would deliberately sour perfectly good milk and then drink it for breakfast. The Mongols, meanwhile, couldn't fathom why Europeans ate mouldy cheese. So really, everyone was judging everyone else's fermented dairy choices. Your wife drinks from her own bowl, and your children are waking now, emerging from their sleeping spots and immediately heading for the airag bag because they're hungry and thirsty, and this is breakfast. Your eldest daughter, maybe 12 years old, gives the bag a vigorous stirring before ladling out her portion. Your son, younger, drinks his airag with the resigned expression of someone who wishes breakfast came in different flavors but knows there aren't exactly alternative options available. The airag sits in your stomach with a pleasant warmth. It's not heavy like a full meal, but it provides enough sustenance to get you started on the morning's tasks. The slight alcohol content is already working its gentle magic, smoothing out the sharp edges of early morning consciousness. You'll drink more throughout the day, everyone will, because airag is fundamentally what keeps life functioning here. It's hydration in a landscape where water sources can be scarce. It's calories in a mobile society that doesn't always have time for elaborate meal preparation. It's social bonding during gatherings, medicine during illness, and comfort during hardship. A quirky historical detail that often surprises people, visitors to Mongol camps were expected to drink airag as a gesture of hospitality and respect, and refusing it was considered deeply offensive. Ambassadors from sedentary civilizations would write home about the horror of being forced to consume this sour, fizzy horse liquid, describing it in terms usually reserved for poison. One Persian chronicler claimed airag attacks the head like the strongest wine, which is somewhat dramatic considering its low alcohol content, but hey, maybe he was a lightweight. Meanwhile, the Mongols considered anyone who couldn't handle airag to be fundamentally weak and unsuited for serious consideration. You sit near the fire which someone has already stoked back to life, and you hold your bowl of airag in both hands. Around you, the gur is coming fully awake. Your mother is organizing wool for the day's work. Your wife is checking the food supplies dried meat, some stored cheese, maybe grain if you've been near trading posts recently. The children are arguing about whose turn it is to stir the airag bag next, a never-ending debate that will continue throughout the day. The fermentation bag itself is a piece of technology that doesn't get enough credit. It has to be absolutely watertight, which requires serious leatherworking skill. It has to be large enough to hold substantial quantities, but not so large that it becomes unwieldy. The constant agitation prevents spoilage and keeps the texture consistentif. You let it sit undisturbed for too long, you end up with separated curds and whey, which is fine for making other dairy products, but defeats the purpose of airag. Historians still argue whether the stirring ritual had spiritual dimensions or was purely practical, but regardless of motivation, the result is a stable, portable, self-perpetuating food source that travels with you wherever you go. You finish your bowl and ladle out another. The second bowl always tastes better than the first, or maybe that's just the alcohol talking. Either way, you're feeling properly fortified now, ready to face whatever the day brings. Your wife drinks her second bowl as well, and you sit together in comfortable silence, watching the children prepare for their own day's activities. Outside, you can hear the sounds of other families beginning their mornings. Smoke rises from multiple gear roofs now. Someone is singing a woman's voice, high and clear, performing one of those traditional long songs that can stretch a single syllable across multiple notes. Animals are moving, people are talking, and the camp is fully transitioning from night to day. The airag bag gets another round of stirring from your daughter, who attacks it with the enthusiasm of someone who considers this her personal athletic training. The liquid sloshes vigorously. Some societies do morning yoga. Your people do morning dairy agitation. Different strokes for different folks, right? You stand, feeling the airag's gentle warmth in your limbs, ready to move on to the next tasks that await. The sun is fully up now. The steppe is awake, and you've got livestock to tend, equipment to maintain, and possibly a whole camp to move if conditions require it. But first, you've had your fermented horse milk, which means you're basically ready for anything. You step out of the gur again, this time with purpose beyond morning milking. The sun is climbing higher, warming the grass and evaporating the dew in wisps of vapor that drift across the landscape like small ghosts. It's time to check on what the Mongols call the 5 snouts, the 5 types of livestock that define not just your wealth, but your entire way of life. Sheep, goats, cattle, horses, and camels. These animals are your bank account, your food supply, your transportation system, your raw materials, and honestly, your entire economy rolled into living, breathing, sometimes frustratingly stubborn packages. You start with the sheep because there are more of them than anything else, and they require the most basic supervision. Your flock numbers perhaps 50 animals, which is modest but respectable. They're already grazing, moving in that characteristic tight cluster that sheep seem to prefer, as if they're all terrified of being alone for even a moment. You walk the perimeter of the flock, checking for any animals that seem off limping, lagging behind, showing signs of illness or injury. One ewe has a slight limp. You approach her slowly, and she tries to move away because sheep have 2 modes, mild panic and absolute panic. You catch her with practiced efficiency, running your hands down her leg to find the problem. There's a small stone wedged between her hoof pads. You remove it, check that there's no infection starting, and release her back to the flock. She immediately forgets this traumatic experience and goes back to grazing because sheep have the memory capacity of particularly dim goldfish. The sheep provide wool, meat, milk, though less than the mares, and leather. Their wool will be sheared, cleaned, felted, and woven into everything from gur coverings to clothing. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol felt-making technology was so advanced that their waterproof felt could withstand torrential rains that would soak through most medieval European textiles. The secret was in the processing hours of beating, rolling, and compressing wet wool until the fibers locked together in a nearly impenetrable mat. Next are the goats, scattered around the periphery of the sheep flock like rebellious teenagers who refuse to follow the crowd. You have maybe 20 goats, and they're all trouble in different ways. Goats are intelligent, curious, and completely indifferent to your authority. One is trying to climb onto a cart. Another is investigating whether your boot is edible. A third has found a particularly thorny bush and is eating it with evident satisfaction because goats have absolutely no sense of self-preservation. But goats earn their keep. Their milk is richer than mare's milk, excellent for making cheese and yogurt. Their hair especially, the soft undercoatus, prized for weaving fine textiles. Cashmere comes from goats like these, and a quirky historical detail. Mongol traders made fortunes selling goat fiber to Chinese merchants who would weave it into luxury fabrics for aristocrats who had no idea they were wearing processed goat fur. The marketing was, perhaps, strategically vague. Your cattle are fewer, maybe 5 or 6 head, but they're valuable assets. They're the stockier, more cold-tolerant varieties that can handle steppe winters, not like the pampered dairy cattle of agricultural societies. Your cattle provide milk, obviously, but they're also crucial for heavy pulling work. When it's time to move camp, the cattle pull the largest carts, the ones loaded with disassembled gur frames and heavy household goods. You approach the cattle and check their condition. One bull has impressive horns that curve forward, and he watches you with that expression of bovine indifference that suggests he's simultaneously aware of your presence and completely unconcerned by it. The cows are calmer, more interested in grazing than in human drama. You run your hands along their sides, checking for injuries or parasites. Everything looks good. These animals are tough, adapted to a life of constant movement and variable grazing. Historians still argue whether Mongol cattle were primarily kept for milk, meat, or labor, or whether the answer is simply yes, all of the above, depending on what's needed at the moment. This kind of multi-purpose livestock management shows up across nomadic cultures, and it drives agricultural societies crazy because they like their animals' specialized dairy cows for milk, beef cattle for meat, oxen for pulling. The Mongol approach of this cow will do whatever I need it to do seems inefficient until you realize that specialization is a luxury of people who stay in one place. Your horses are next, and there are perhaps 15 of them in your personal herd. They're not grazing as a tight group like the sheep. Horses are more independent, more aware of their surroundings. These are Mongol horses, short and stocky compared to the tall breeds of Europe and the Middle East, but incredibly tough and enduring. They can survive on grass alone, requiring no grain supplements. They can tolerate temperature extremes that would kill pampered stable horses. And they're fast enough, maneuverable enough, and intelligent enough to serve as the foundation of the most successful cavalry force in medieval history. You check each horse, looking at their legs, their hooves, their overall condition. One gelding has a small scrape on his shoulder, probably from another horse, as social hierarchies among horses involve occasional physical negotiations. It's minor, nothing that needs treatment. A mare is particularly alert this morning, ears swiveling at every sound, and you make a mental note that she might be coming into season soon, which means keeping her away from the stallions, unless you're planning to breed her. Your horses are wealth, transportation, food in emergencies, and military equipment all rolled into one. The bond between Mongol and horse is the stuff of legend, and honestly, it's not exaggerated. You've spent more time on horseback than on your own feet. You can sleep in the saddle. You can shoot a bow at full gallop. Your horses know your voice, your touch, your habits. This isn't pet ownership, it's partnership formed through mutual dependence. Finally, the camels. You only have 3, which is actually pretty good. Camels are expensive, temperamental, and absolutely essential for long-distance travel or desert crossings. These are Bactrian camels, the 2-humped variety that can survive both scorching summers and brutal winters. Their grazing a bit apart from the other animals, which is typical. Camels are antisocial creatures who tolerate other animals but don't seek their company. You approach your lead camel and he turns to look at you with that expression of profound disdain that only camels can achieve. His nostrils flare. He makes a gurgling sound deep in his throat, a warning that he's not in the mood for whatever you're planning. You check him anyway because camel opinions are noted, but not determinative. His feet are fine-those broad pads that distribute weight so efficiently. His humps are full, indicating good nutrition. He tolerates your inspection with the air of someone doing you an enormous favor. Camels can carry loads that would break a horse's back. They can go days without water. Their hair is excellent for weaving coarse textiles and ropes. Their milk is nutritious, though you need nerves of steel to milk a camel, and a well-trained camel is worth a small fortune in trade. Your 3 camels represent serious wealth, the kind that makes your family solidly middle class by steppe standards. You step back and survey your animals, all 5 snouts accounted for, all looking healthy. This is your livelihood, scattered across the grass in various states of grazing, resting, and general animal activity. Other families are doing the same check, moving among their herds, assessing conditions, making mental notes of what needs attention. The steppe economy is walking, eating, and occasionally making annoyed noises at you, and honestly, that's exactly how it should be. With your livestock checked and accounted for, you turn your attention to a more strategic question: is today a moving day, or are you staying put? This isn't a decision you make. Alone, a nomadic life requires constant consultation and consensus, but it's also not something that requires lengthy council meetings. You've been reading the steppe your entire life, and so has everyone else in camp. So the decision-making process is more about confirming what everyone already suspects rather than debating from scratch. You scan the landscape, looking at the grass immediately around camp. It's been grazed down pretty significantly over the past few days. The sheep and goats have been particularly thorough, cropping the vegetation close to the ground in that radius around the gers. This is expected. You knew when you arrived here that you'd get maybe 5 to 7 days of good grazing before needing to move on. The question is whether you've hit that limit yet, or whether there's another day or two left in this spot. You walk further from camp, maybe 100 paces out, where the grazing pressure is lighter. The grass here is still decent, about knee-high, with enough new growth that your animals could sustain themselves. But you're not just thinking about today, you're thinking about the next few days, the next week. If you stay here too long, you'll overgraze, damaging the grassland's ability to recover and setting yourself up for problems when you circle back through this area next season. Nomadic pastoralism isn't just randomly wandering around. It's carefully managed rotational grazing that's been refined over centuries. The sky is clear this morning, a deep blue that stretches forever. No clouds on the horizon, no signs of incoming weather. The wind is light from the south, carrying the scent of warm grass and distant places. You read these signs automatically, the way someone in your old suburban life might read a weather app. Clear skies mean good travel conditions if you decide to move. Southern wind this time of year usually means sustained good weather. No signs of those sudden storms that can make travel miserable and dangerous. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol camps typically move every 3 to 7 days during the growing season, covering distances of 5 to 15 miles per move. This wasn't random, it was precisely calibrated to allow grasslands to recover while ensuring livestock had adequate nutrition. Modern range scientists studying these patterns have concluded that traditional Mongol grazing practices were actually sustainable and sometimes even beneficial to steppe ecology, preventing the kind of overgrazing that damages grasslands permanently. You head back toward camp, where several other household heads are emerging from their gers, clearly thinking about the same question. You meet near the center of the camp, where the elderly headmanar-weathered man in his 60s who's seen more seasons than anyone else here is already standing. He doesn't need to call a formal meeting. People just gravitate toward him when decisions need making. The grass is thinning, someone says, stating the obvious. Water's still good, another adds. There's a small stream about half a mile east, and it hasn't shown signs of drying up yet. The headman squints at the horizon, at the grass, at the sky. We could stay another day, he says slowly. Maybe 2, but we'd be pushing it. You nod. This matches your own assessment. The grazing is adequate but declining. The water is fine. The weather looks stable. But if you wait too long, you'll either overgraze this spot or you'll end up moving during less favourable conditions. Better to move proactively than reactively. There's good grazing north of here, your wife's brother mentions. We passed through last year about this time. The grass was thick, and there's that valley with the protected camping spots. Everyone knows the place he means. It's about 10 miles away, a solid half-day's travel with loaded carts and livestock. The valley offers wind protection, which is valuable, and the grazing there should be excellent right now, given the seasonal timing. A quirky historical detail that surprises many people, Mongol camps maintained incredibly detailed mental maps of grazing lands, water sources, and seasonal conditions across territories spanning hundreds of miles. This knowledge was passed down through oral tradition with remarkable accuracy, and families would return to the same seasonal camping spots year after year, sometimes for generations. European travellers were amazed that Mongols could navigate vast, featureless steppes without written maps or landmarks, not realizing that the landscape wasn't featureless to those who knew how to read it. "We move tomorrow morning," the headman decides. There's no vote, no lengthy debate. He simply articulated what everyone was already thinking, and his experience gives weight to the decision. Tomorrow gives everyone today to prepare to organize their belongings, to plan the cart loading, to make sure everything is secured properly for travel. You feel a mix of reactions to this decision. Moving is significant work, but it's also just part of the rhythm of life. You've moved hundreds of times. You'll move hundreds more. There's no anxiety about it, no sense that it's an imposition. This is simply how life works. Staying in one place too long would feel strange, unnatural, like holding your breath for too long. Historians still argue whether Mongol mobility was primarily driven by livestock needs, strategic military considerations, or cultural preferences that valued movement over settlement. The answer is probably all three, intertwined so thoroughly that trying to separate them is pointless. Your animals need fresh grazing, yes? But there's also something deeply ingrained in your worldview that sees movement as normal and settlement as suspicious. Sedentary people who live their entire lives in one spot seem vaguely sad to you, trapped in place like trees. The informal meeting breaks up. People head back to their gers to start preparing. Your wife is already mentally organizing what needs to be done, checking the gers structure for any repairs needed before dismantling, organizing household goods, planning the cart loading to maximize efficiency. Your older children will help. Even the younger ones have tasks appropriate to their age. You spend a moment just standing there looking at the camp that will cease to exist by tomorrow afternoon. The gers will be dismantled, loaded onto carts, and transported to that valley 10 miles north. By evening tomorrow, this spot will look like nothing more than flattened grass and some fire circles. Within a week or two, even those traces will fade. The grass will recover, grow back, and by this time next year, this spot will be ready for another camp to use it. This is sustainable, living in its most literal form, taking what you need, moving on before you take too much, allowing the land to regenerate. It's not romantic primitivism, it's practical resource management developed through trial and error over countless generations. Modern environmental scientists could learn quite a bit from this approach, though they probably want to write papers about it rather than actually living it, which honestly is probably a wise choice, because this lifestyle isn't for everyone. You head back to your ger, already thinking about tomorrow's move. The day ahead will be spent preparing, but for now, there are other tasks to complete, a training to do, maintenance work, and about 1,000 other small jobs that keep nomadic life functioning smoothly. You retrieve your bow from inside the ger, handling it with the care it deserves. This isn't just a weapon, it's a piece of sophisticated technology that represents centuries of refined engineering, and honestly, it's probably more technologically advanced than half the tools you'd find in a medieval European city. The composite bow is short, curved, and deceptively powerful, made from layers of horn, wood, and sinew that have been carefully laminated together and allowed to cure for years before the bow was even considered ready for use. The bow feels familiar in your hands, the grip worn smooth from daily use. You also grab your quiver, a cylindrical leather container holding perhaps 20 arrows, each one straight, properly fletched, and tipped with iron points that you've sharpened yourself. Arrows aren't something you can afford to lose. Casually, each one represents hours of work, so you keep track of them with the kind of attention most people reserve for their children. Outside, several other men and a few women are already gathering at the practice area, a stretch of open ground about 200 paces from camp where targets have been set up. These aren't fancy bullseye targets like you'd see at a modern archery range. They're simple straw bundles wrapped with leather, mounted on wooden frames at various distances. Some are stationary, others can be moved to simulate different scenarios. You take your position among the other archers, and without any formal signal, practice begins. This isn't a structured class with an instructor barking orders. Everyone here has been shooting bows since childhood, and morning practice is less about learning new skills and more about maintaining the ones you already have. Muscle memory needs reinforcement. Technique needs daily attention. And honestly, archery is one of those skills where even a few days without practice can result in noticeable decline. You nock an arrow a smooth, practiced motion that your hands perform almost automatically. The arrow sits on the left side of the bow, resting across your thumb. Your grip is firm but not tense. You draw the string back, not with your fingers like European archers do, but with your thumb, which is protected by a thumb ring made of bone or horn. This thumb draw technique is actually crucial to the composite bow's effectiveness, allowing for a cleaner release and more power transfer. The target is perhaps 70 paces away. You focus on it, your peripheral vision blurring, your breathing steady. The bow is drawn to full extension, the string almost touching your ear, and you can feel the enormous tension stored in those laminated layers of horn and sinew. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol composite bows could achieve draw weights of 100 to 160 pounds, significantly more than English longbows, which typically maxed out around 100 pounds. This translated to arrows that could penetrate armor at distances where European arrows would bounce off harmlessly. You release. The string snaps forward with a sharp twang and the arrow flies. It arcs slightly, then drops toward the target, striking the straw bundle with a solid thunk about 4 inches left of center. Not perfect, but adequate. You nock another arrow immediately, making a micro-adjustment in your stance, and shoot again. This one hits closer to center. Around you, other archers are maintaining their own rhythm. The air fills with the sound of bowstrings releasing, arrows striking targets, and the occasional grunt of effort or satisfaction. A young man, maybe 16, is working on his speed shooting, trying to get multiple arrows in the air before the first one hits the target. He manages 3, which is respectable, though the legendary warriors could supposedly get 5 or even 7 arrows airborne simultaneously. Whether those stories are true or exaggerated is a topic historians still argue about. But either way, the emphasis on rapid fire was real and tactically crucial. You shift your focus to a target at a greater distance, maybe 100 paces. This requires more arc, more estimation of trajectory. You adjust your aim upward, release, and watch the arrow fly. It drops short, hitting the ground about 10 paces in front of the target. You make a mental note of the adjustment needed and try again. This time, the arrow sails over the target. Third shot splits the difference and hits low on the straw bundle. Good enough. The composite bow's construction is actually fascinating if you stop to think about it, which you don't usually because you're too busy using it. The back of the bow side facing away from you when drawn is made of sinew, which handles tension incredibly well. The belly side facing toward you is made of horn, which handles compression. The wooden core between them provides the structural framework. When you draw the bow, the sinew stretches, the horn compresses, and both materials want desperately to return to their original state. When you release, all that stored energy transfers to the arrow with remarkable efficiency. A quirky historical detail, the glue used to laminate composite bows was often made from fish bladders, boiled down into an adhesive that was both strong and somewhat flexible. Different regions had different recipes. Some used hide glue, some used sinew, some added mysterious ingredients that were family secrets. And here's the fun part. Composite bows were sensitive to moisture. Get one wet and the glue could soften, causing the laminated layers to separate. This made Mongol bows less effective in humid or rainy conditions, which is one reason why Mongol military campaigns in Southeast Asia and Japan faced challenges. You can conquer the world, but you can't conquer humidity affecting your adhesive technology. You transition to moving practice now. Another archer pulls on a rope, and one of the targets starts sliding along a wooden rail, moving from left to right at about the speed of a walking person. You track it, leading the target slightly to account for its movement, and release. The arrow misses by a foot. You nock another, adjust your lead, and this one strikes the moving target dead center. There's a small surge of satisfaction hitting moving targets never gets old, and it's the skill that made Mongol cavalry so devastating. Your shoulders are starting to feel the work now. Drawing a heavy bow repeatedly is serious exercise, and your back and shoulder muscles are definitely getting a workout. But this is necessary maintenance. Warriors who neglected their archery practice quickly found themselves outmatched in combat, and on the steppe, being outmatched in combat has permanent consequences. Children are practicing too, with lighter bows appropriate to their strength. A boy who looks about 8 is working on his form under the watchful eye of his father, who makes small corrections to his stance, his grip, his release. The investment in archery training starts young because by the time you're 15, you need to be combat effective. There's no time for a long learning curve when survival depends on military skill. You shoot for another 20 minutes, working through various distances and scenarios. Some shots you take from a kneeling position, some while moving side to side. The practice isn't just about accuracy. It's about maintaining that accuracy under different conditions, different postures, different states of physical exertion. In actual combat, you'll be shooting from horseback at full gallop, which is a whole different level of difficulty, but that training happens separately. Finally, you're satisfied with your morning's work. Your quiver is significantly lighter. You've shot most of your arrows and, now, you need to retrieve them. You walk to the targets and pull your arrows free, checking each one for damage. 2 have bent tips that will need straightening. 1 has lost some fletching and will need repair. The rest are fine, ready for tomorrow's practice. Other archers are finishing up too, retrieving arrows, comparing shots, offering casual commentary on technique. There's a camaraderie here, the kind that comes from shared skill and shared purpose. Every man here knows that this morning practice session isn't just hobby activities. It's maintaining the combat capability that allows Mongol armies to dominate battlefields from Korea to Hungary. You head back toward your gur, bow in hand, quiver refilled with retrieved arrows. Your shoulders ache pleasantly. Your thumb is slightly sore despite the thumb ring, and you're satisfied that your skills remain sharp, ready for whatever might require them. Near the horse herd, a scene unfolds that would probably give modern helicopter parents an anxiety attack. Several toddlers, none older than 4, are being introduced to horseback riding. Not pony rides with an adult holding the reins, actual independent riding on actual horses. This isn't reckless parenting. This is systematic training in the skill that defines Mongol culture more than any other single factor. If you can't ride, you're not really Mongol, and the training starts approximately 5 minutes after a child can walk. You wander over to watch because there's always something entertaining about tiny humans wrestling with the physics of remaining upright on a moving animal. Your youngest son is among the group, a 3-year-old with more confidence than coordination, which is pretty much the default state for children his age. Several adults are supervising, including your wife and a couple of experienced older children who remember their own early lessons with varying degrees of fondness. The horses selected for this training are crucial. You don't put a toddler on a spirited young mare or a temperamental gelding. These are the oldest, calmest, most patient horses in the herd animals who've done this duty for years and have achieved a state of zen acceptance about small humans climbing all over them. One particular mare, grey with age and absolutely done with everyone's nonsense, stands perfectly still as your son is lifted onto her back. She doesn't even flick an ear. She's seen it all before. Your son sits astride the mare with the wide-legged, uncertain posture of someone who isn't entirely sure how this is supposed to work. He's not using a saddles come later, after basic balance is established, just sitting directly on the horse's back with his small hands gripping the mane. His legs stick out almost perpendicular to the horse's sides because he's simply not big enough yet to wrap them around the animal properly. He looks simultaneously terrified and thrilled, which is probably accurate. Your wife walks beside the mare, keeping one hand on your son's back for stability. The mare starts walking slowly, patiently, like she's transporting the world's most fragile cargo. Your son immediately starts listing to one side. Your wife steadies him. He overcorrects and lists to the other side. This continues for several wobbling steps, a process that looks like it might end with your son testing the ground's hardness with his face. But he doesn't fall. He's gripping that mane with impressive determination, and his body is slowly, instinctively finding its center of balance. After a dozen steps, he's listing less dramatically. After 2 dozen, he's almost stable. The mare continues her patient plodding, completely unfazed by the tiny person threatening to slide off her back at any moment. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol children typically began riding between ages 3 and 5, and by age 5 or 6, they were expected to ride independently for hours. By adolescence, they could perform complex mounted maneuvers and shoot accurately from horseback at full gallop. This early training was so effective that European observers consistently commented that Mongols seemed to be born in the saddle and rode as naturally as they walked. It wasn't natural. Talented was systematic training starting at an age when most European children were still being protected from sharp corners. Around you, other small children are going through similar initiation processes. A girl who's maybe 4 is already more confident than your son, sitting straighter and requiring less steadying. She's done this before, clearly, and she's progressing to the next stage where the adult walks a few steps away, testing whether the child can maintain balance without immediate support. She can, mostly, though there's one alarming moment where she starts sliding sideways and has to be caught. Another boy is having less success. He's crying, not from injury, but from frustration and probably some fear, and his father is crouched beside the horse trying to provide encouragement while also preventing a complete meltdown. Just hold on, the father says, which is advice that's technically accurate but not particularly helpful. The boy grips the horse's mane tighter, his face scrunched up in concentration and distress. Historians still argue whether the early riding age was purely practical necessary for a mobile lifestyle, whether it carried deeper cultural significance related to identity formation and gender roles. The practical argument is strong. In a society where you might need to evacuate camp quickly during a raid or natural disaster, every person capable of independent riding increases survival odds. But there's also something ritualistic about it. This transition from helpless infant to mounted person, from someone who must be carried to someone who can travel independently. Your son has made it around the practice circle once, which is apparently enough for today. Your wife lifts him down, and he immediately wants to go again because toddler logic doesn't include concepts like gradual training or giving the horse a break. She deflects him with promises of trying again tomorrow, and he accepts this with the philosophical resignation of someone who knows negotiating won't change the outcome. A quirky historical detail that surprises people. Very young children sometimes rode in special wooden saddles that had high backs and sides, essentially baby seats mounted on horses, allowing them to travel with adults during camp moves without requiring constant holding. These weren't used for training, just for transportation, and they're not something you see in most historical depictions, but they show up in enough written accounts and artwork to suggest they were common. Because even nomadic societies needed the 13th century equivalent of car seats, apparently. The older children are working on more advanced skills now. A 6-year-old girl is practicing mounting and dismounting without assistance, which requires surprising core strength and coordination. She grabs the horse's mane, jumps, swings her leg over, and scrambles aboard in a movement that's more enthusiasm than technique, but gets the job done. Dismounting is easier. She just slides off the side, landing on her feet with a slight stumble. A boy who's maybe 7 is practicing steering, learning to guide the horse using leg pressure and subtle weight shifts rather than pulling the reins aggressively. The horse responds to his turning left when he leans and applies pressure with his right leg, turning right when he does the opposite. The boy's face shows intense concentration, and when the horse responds correctly, he breaks into a huge grin. This is the moment where riding stops being terrifying and starts being empowering. You remember your own early riding lessons, though the memories are hazy and probably somewhat romanticized. You remember falling off, definitely remember that and getting back on because refusing wasn't an option. You remember the day when balance suddenly clicked, when your body understood what it needed to do without your brain consciously directing every muscle. You remember the first time you rode alone without an adult nearby and feeling simultaneously free and terrified. Your daughter, who's 12 and has been riding confidently for years, is now helping teach others. She leads a horse with a 4-year-old aboard, providing the steady adult presence while also explaining what the younger child should do. Sit up straight, she instructs, in a tone that suggests she's been on the receiving end of similar instructions thousands of times. Don't pull the mane so hard, the horse doesn't like it. The child adjusts, and the mare continues her patient walking. The cultural transmission happening here is remarkable if you stop to think about it. These children are learning a skill that will define their entire lives, taught by people who learned the same way, in an unbroken chain stretching back generations. There are no books, no written manuals, no instructional videos. Just observation, practice, correction, and gradual improvement. The training session winds down as the children's attention spans reach their limits and the horses start showing signs of wanting to return to important grazing business. Your son is already asking when he can ride again, which you take as a positive sign. He hasn't been traumatized or discouraged. He's ready to try again, which means the training is working as intended. You watch as the horses are released back to the herd and the children scatter to other activities. In a few years, these wobbly toddlers will be competent riders. In a decade, they'll be accomplished horsemen and horsewomen capable of riding for days across rough terrain. And in 2 decades, some of them will be cavalry warriors whose mounted archery skills will terrify enemies across multiple continents. But for now, they're just small children who've managed to not fall off a patient horse for 5 minutes, and honestly, that's achievement enough for one morning. The sun is nearly overhead now, and your stomach is reminding you that fermented mare's milk, while nutritious, doesn't really qualify as a substantial meal. It's time for the midday food preparation, which in Mongol culinary tradition means one thing: boiled meat. Not roasted, not baked, not prepared with herbs and spices in some elaborate culinary dance, just boiled. European travellers will write about this cooking method with the kind of horror usually reserved for witnessing war crimes. But on the steppe, it's the most practical and efficient way to cook large quantities of meat with limited fuel and maximum nutrient retention. You head toward where the food preparation area has been set up, essentially just a clear space with a fire pit and some large cooking vessels. Your wife is already there with several other women and a couple of men because while cooking tends to be female-dominated work, it's not exclusively so, and everyone needs to know how to feed themselves. A sheep has been selected from the flock, one of the older rams whose wool production has declined and whose meat will be reasonably tender despite his age. The butchering has already been completed by the time you arrive. The ram has been efficiently dispatched, skinned, and sectioned into manageable pieces. Nothing is wasted, and I mean absolutely nothing. The hide will be processed into leather. The wool will be cleaned and felted. The intestines will be cleaned and used as sausage casings or storage containers. The bladder might become a storage bag. Even the bones will be cracked open for marrow or boiled for broth and eventually made into tools or game pieces. The meat chunks sit in a wooden bowl, dark red and surprisingly lean. Steppe sheep don't develop the kind of marbling you see in modern commercial breeds because they walk miles every day and eat nothing but grass. This is muscle meat, tough enough that it requires serious cooking time, but flavorful in a way that grain-fattened animals never quite achieve. A large bronze cauldron of the camp's most valuable possession soits over the fire, already filled with water that's beginning to heat. Bronze cauldrons are expensive, traded from sedentary civilizations or captured during raids, and they're treasured items passed down through generations. Some families use leather bags for cooking, a technique where you heat stones in the fire and then drop them into a leather bag filled with water and leet, which technically works but requires more effort and attention. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol armies travelling on campaign often cooked using the stone boiling method specifically because they didn't want to carry heavy cauldrons. They'd butcher an animal, clean out its stomach, fill the stomach with water and meat, drop in heated stones, and essentially turn the animal's own stomach into a cooking vessel. European chroniclers found this practice both ingenious and deeply disturbing, which pretty much sums up the European reaction to most Mongol practices. Your wife adds chunks of mutton to the cauldron as the water heats. There's no measuring, no recipe consultation. She's done this thousands of times and knows exactly how much meat to water ratio produces the best results. The meat sinks to the bottom, the water slowly coming to temperature. The fire beneath the cauldron is carefully maintained hot enough to boil, but not so hot that it burns the meat or cracks the bronze. Salt is added, a precious commodity that's been traded from distant regions where salt lakes or seacoast access make it available. Out here on the steppes, salt doesn't just grow on trees. It doesn't grow anywhere, so it's used judiciously. A small amount goes a long way in terms of flavour enhancement and meat preservation. Some families have access to wild onions or garlic that can be added, but many don't. And honestly, Mongol cuisine isn't about complex flavouring. It's about fuel, about protein and fat that keep you functioning in a physically demanding lifestyle. The water begins to bubble and foam rises to the surface. Your wife skims this off with a wooden ladle blood proteins and other impurities that create an unpleasant texture if left in. The meat chunks bounce gently in the boiling water, slowly changing colour from deep red to grey-brown. The smell rising from the cauldron is rich, savoury, essentially the pure essence of mutton with nothing to mask or enhance it. You either like this smell or you don't, and if you don't, you're in for a challenging life on the steppe. A quirky detail that often surprises people, Mongols sometimes cooked meat in its own hide, essentially creating a sealed cooking environment where the animal's skin became both pot and lid. This was particularly common with smaller animals like goats. You'd clean out the carcass, fill the skin with meat and water, sew it shut, and hang it over a fire. The skin wouldn't burn because the water inside kept the temperature regulated, and the result was incredibly tender meat. The downside was that you couldn't use the hide for leather afterward, so this technique was typically reserved for situations where you needed food immediately and weren't concerned about preserving materials for later use. The boiling continues for what feels like hours, but is probably closer to 90 minutes. Tough steppe mutton needs time to become tender, and rushing the process results in meat that's about as chewable as leather belts. You sit near the fire, occasionally adding fuel, watching the cauldron bubble. Other people are doing their own tasks nearby. Someone's repairing a saddle, someone else is working on felt, children are playing. The cooking process doesn't require constant attention, just periodic checking. Historians still argue whether Mongol reliance on boiled meat was purely practical, maximizing calories with minimum fuel, or whether it carried cultural significance that marked a distinction from sedentary agricultural peoples who used more elaborate cooking methods. The practical argument is strong. Boiling retains more nutrients than roasting, uses less fuel than maintaining a roasting fire, and allows you to create nutritious broth as a bonus. But there's also evidence that Mongols viewed their simple cooking as morally superior to the decadent, multi-step preparations of Chinese or Persian cuisine, which suggests food preparation had identity dimensions beyond mere efficiency. Your wife tests the meat with a knife, checking tenderness. It's getting close. The chunks have shrunk somewhat as they've cooked, and the water has turned into a rich, fatty broth. Nothing is wasted here either. That broth will be consumed as a beverage or used as a base for other dishes. Wasting food isn't just impractical. It's actively offensive to sensibilities shaped by environmental hardship and resource scarcity. Finally, the meat is deemed ready. Your wife uses a wooden fork to spear chunks out of the cauldron, placing them in a large wooden bowl. Steam rises in clouds, the smell intensifying now that the meat is exposed to air. The chunks glisten with fat, and honestly, if you were expecting anything resembling restaurant presentation, you'd be deeply disappointed. This is functional food, not aesthetic food. People gather as word spreads that the meal is ready. There's no formal announcement, no dinner bell people, just know based on timing and smell and the general rhythm of the day. You grab your knife, everyone carries their own eating knife and cut into a chunk of mutton. The meat is tender now, pulling apart easily. You pop a piece into your mouth and chew. It's rich, fatty, intensely meaty, with the salt providing just enough flavor enhancement to make it actively enjoyable rather than just edible. You eat directly from the communal bowl, as does everyone else. There are no individual plates, no serving utensils, no elaborate table settings. You cut your portion, eat it, cut more, repeat until satisfied. The broth is ladled into wooden cups and passed around. It's greasy, salty, and exactly what your body wants after a morning of physical activity. Children eat smaller portions, supervised by adults, to ensure they don't choke on large pieces. The elderly get choice cuts, the tender portions that require less chewing. Everyone gets enough, not necessarily as much as they want, but enough to satisfy hunger and provide energy for the afternoon's tasks. The meal is consumed relatively quickly, maybe 15 or 20 minutes for the entire camp to eat their fill. There's conversation, but not lingering. Midday meals aren't social events, so much as necessary, breaks for refueling. You finish your portion, feeling pleasantly full, ready for the afternoon work ahead. The leftover broth is transferred to leather containers for later consumption. The bones are set aside for marrow extraction and eventual tool making. Even the cooking water has value, nothing discarded. And honestly, if modern food waste statistics make you uncomfortable, you'd find Mongol resource utilization either inspiring or exhausting, depending on your perspective. You stand, wiping your greasy hands on your deal. There are no napkins, and honestly, a little mutton fat on your clothing is just part of life. The sun is past its zenith now, the afternoon stretching ahead with tasks that need completing before tomorrow's camp move. But for now, you're fed, satisfied, and ready for whatever comes next. The afternoon stretches before you with the kind of endless task list that defines nomadic life. Unlike sedentary people who can let minor repairs accumulate into weekend projects, you can't afford to ignore maintenance. When your house, your transportation system, and your survival equipment are all constantly in motion, deterioration happens fast, and small problems become big problems if left unattended. So you settle into the rhythm of afternoon repair work, that steady grind of maintaining the material culture that keeps mobile life functioning. You start with leather work because several pieces of your tack need attention. Your saddle has a strap that's beginning to fray, and ignoring it now means dealing with a broken strap at the worst possible moment later. You retrieve the saddle from where it's stored inside the gira, relatively simple wooden frame design with minimal padding, because Mongol saddles prioritize functionality over comfort. Europeans use those high-backed, heavily padded affairs that look comfortable but limit mobility. Your saddle is minimal, lightweight, designed for hours of riding while maintaining the ability to twist, turn, shoot, and fight. You sit cross-legged in the shade of your ger with the saddle in your lap, examining the worn leather straps and the stitching that's beginning to fray in places. This isn't catastrophic damage, just the normal wear that comes from daily use, but left unattended, it'll become a serious problem. Better to spend an hour on maintenance now than to have your saddle disintegrate mid-ride during tomorrow's move. Your repair kit is simple but effective. Leather strips, sinew thread, a bone needle, and a sharp knife. You cut away the damaged stitching on a section where the leather has started to separate, then restitch it using a strip of wet sinew that will shrink and tighten as it dries, creating a bond that's actually stronger than the original. The work is meditative, repetitive, the kind of task that occupies your hands while leaving your mind free to wander. Around you, other people are engaged in similar maintenance work. This is the rhythm of nomadic life-constant attention to the equipment that keeps everything functioning. One day without maintenance might be fine. A week without maintenance means broken gear, lost animals, and potentially life-threatening equipment failures at the worst possible moment. Your wife is working on felt, the material that's absolutely central to steppe life and deserves more respect than it gets. She's taking wool that was cleaned and carded days ago and beginning the process of felting it into dense, waterproof fabric. The technique involves laying out the wool fibers in overlapping layers, wetting them thoroughly, and then rolling and beating them for hours until the fibers lock together into a solid mat. It's physically demanding work, requiring arm strength and patience, and the result is a material that's windproof, water-resistant, and provides excellent insulation. You watch her work for a moment, impressed as always by the transformation from loose wool to solid felt. She's using a wooden roller, pressing and turning the wet wool repeatedly, occasionally adding more moisture, compressing the fibers until they mesh together into a dense fabric. This felt will eventually become part of a gur covering, or clothing, or any of the dozens of other applications where you need durable, weather-resistant material. You turn your attention to your own maintenance tasks. Leather repair is today's priority, specifically your saddle, which has developed a concerning crack in one of the wooden components of the frame. A broken saddle during tomorrow's move would be somewhere between inconvenient and dangerous, depending on whether it failed while you were riding or just while it was loaded on a cart. You retrieve the saddle from inside your gur, carrying it to a workspace where tools and materials are accessible. The Mongol saddle is a sophisticated piece of equipment, nothing like the heavy cavalry saddles of Europe or the elaborate decorated saddles of Persian nobility. It's practical, lightweight, designed for long hours of riding and the ability to shoot a bow while mounted. The wooden frame, called an arched frame or a trees shaped, to distribute weight across the horse's back while allowing the rider's legs to hang naturally. The seat is relatively flat and hard, which sounds uncomfortable but actually provides better control and balance than a deeply curved saddle would. Your saddle has been with you for years, and it shows. The leather is worn smooth in places, cracked in others. The stitching on one side is coming loose, and this absolutely needs attention before tomorrow's move, because riding for hours on a failing saddle is both uncomfortable and potentially dangerous. You settle down with your repair Kita leather pouch containing thread made from sinew, needles made from bone, a curved leatherworking blade, and various other tools that keep your mobile life functioning. The saddle itself is a marvel of practical engineering, though you probably don't think of it in those terms. It's a wooden frame carved to distribute weight across the horse's back, covered with leather and padded with felt. The stirrups are short, designed for standing in rather than sitting, which allows for better balance during mounted archery and reduces fatigue during long-distance riding. This design is so effective that it will eventually spread to Europe, revolutionizing medieval cavalry tactics, but right now it's just how saddles are supposed to be made. You examine the saddle closely, looking for areas of wear or damage. The leather straps that secure it to the horse are showing signs of stress at the attachment points, not broken yet, but headed that way if not addressed. You grab an awl, some sinew thread, and a piece of spare leather from your supplies. This is the kind of maintenance that never ends. Every piece of equipment you own requires constant attention, constant repair, constant vigilance against the slow entropy that tries to break everything down. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol equipment maintenance was so thorough and systematic that armies could campaign for months or even years without returning to permanent bases, simply because every soldier knew how to repair their own gear. European armies of the same period typically required extensive baggage trains with specialized craftsmen, cobblers, armorers, saddlers, while Mongol warriors carried their own repair tools and handled most maintenance themselves. This logistical advantage translated directly into strategic mobility that confounded enemies. You sit cross-legged on the ground with your equipment spread around you. The saddle's girth strap has been showing signs of wear, small cracks in the leather that will become serious tears if not addressed. You've got leather strips prepared for repairs, along with sinew thread and a bone needle. The work is tedious but necessary equipment. Failure at the wrong moment can mean anything from minor inconvenience to actual death, so maintenance isn't optional. You examine the saddle carefully. It's a wooden frame design, lightweight but sturdy, covered with leather and padded with felt. Unlike the heavy European saddles that will develop in later centuries, this saddle is designed for long-distance riding and mounted combat. It distributes weight efficiently, allows for standing in the stirrups while shooting a bow, and can be repaired in the field with materials you carry with you. The wooden frame is showing some wear where the leather wrapping has rubbed through. You'll need to re-wrap that section with fresh leather strips. Your wife sits nearby working on felt, a task that never really ends because felt is constantly needed for gear coverings, clothing, boots, saddle pads, and about 100 other applications. She's working with cleaned wool that's been carded into loose, fluffy masses. The felting process involves layering the wool, wetting it with warm water, sometimes mixed with soap or urine for its chemical properties, and then rolling, beating, and compressing it for hours until the fibers interlock into a dense, water-resistant fabric. She sits on a reed mat with layers of wool spread before her, sprinkling water mixed with soap made from animal fat and wood ash across the fibers. Then she begins the rolling process, using a long wooden pole to compress and agitate the wool. Her hands move in practiced rhythms, rolling, pressing, unrolling, re-rolling. This isn't quick work. Creating a single felt sheet large enough for gear covering can take days of labour, but the result is a material that's weatherproof, durable, and remarkably insulating. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol felt making was so advanced that felt sheets could be made in varying thicknesses for different purposes. Thin felt for summer gear coverings, thick felt for winter, and extrathic felt for flooring. The felt was naturally water-resistant due to the lanolin content in the wool, and well-made felt could last for years, even with constant exposure to the elements. Marco Polo specifically commented on the quality of Mongol felt, noting that it was superior to anything produced in Europe at the time. You're working on saddle repair, a task that requires attention but not constant concentration. Your saddle is a wooden frame covered with leather, designed to distribute a rider's weight evenly while providing stability during mounted archery. One of the leather straps has developed a crack that needs addressing before it becomes a complete break. You've got fresh leather strips, bone needles, and sinew thread, the standard repair materials that every household maintains. The work is meditative in a way. You punch holes with an awl, thread sinew through, pull tight, repeat. Your hands know the motions from thousands of previous repairs. Equipment maintenance is never-ending in nomadic life. The constant movement, the weather exposure, the daily wear and tear means something always needs fixing. People who can't maintain their own gear don't last long. Around you, others are engaged in similar tasks. A woman is repairing a leather water bag, replacing a seam that started to leak. Another is working on boot soles, adding new leather layers to replace worn areas. A young man is braiding leather strips into rope, creating a cord that's flexible but incredibly strong. Children old enough to help are learning these skills through observation and practice, making their own clumsy repairs under adult supervision. A quirky historical detail, Mongols had a reputation for being able to repair almost anything with leather, sinew, and ingenuity. European soldiers captured during battles were often amazed that Mongol warriors could repair damaged armor, weapons, and equipment in the field with minimal tools. The Mongols viewed this self-sufficiency as essential. Relying on specialized craftsmen or replacement equipment was a weakness that sedentary societies could afford, but nomadic warriors could not. Your wife has moved from felt making to wool processing, cleaning raw fleece that will eventually become thread for weaving or more material for felting. She's working with several other women, spreading wool on clean felt sheets, picking out debris, bits of vegetation, dirt, the occasional unfortunate insect. The wool will be washed, carded, and then either spun into thread or prepared for felting. Nothing is wasted. Even the shorter fibers that aren't ideal for spinning can be felted. You finish the saddle repair and test the strap. It holds firm, the sinew stitching creating a strong bond. This repair should last another year or two before needing attention again. You move on to your next project, checking arrow fletching. Several arrows from this morning's practice need their feathers reattached or replaced, and that's detailed work that requires good light and steady hands. The feathers come from various birds' geese, cranes, sometimes eagles if you're lucky enough to find fallen feathers. Each feather is split down the center, creating 2 half feathers that are then carefully bound to the arrow shaft with sinew. The fletching needs to be positioned precisely 3 feathers, spaced evenly around the shaft, oriented to create spin during flight. Get the angle wrong and your arrow will fly erratically. Get it right and you've got accurate, stable flight. Historians still argue whether Mongol arrows used helical fletching angled to create spin or straight fletching no rotation. Evidence exists for both styles, suggesting it might have been a regional variation or personal preference issue. Either way, the fletching was crucial to arrow performance, and archers who couldn't maintain their own arrows were at a serious disadvantage. The afternoon light is golden now, that particular quality that comes when the sun is past its zenith but still several hours from setting. The temperature has warmed up nicely, comfortable working weather. Around the camp, people are engaged in various maintenance, tasks repairing, cleaning, preparing, organizing. Tomorrow's move requires that everything be in working order, and there's a collective understanding that today is the day to make that happen. You work on your arrows with focused attention, replacing fletching on 3 that need it, adjusting on 2 more. Each arrow is unique. You can identify your own arrows by small, distinctive marks, and each one represents hours of cumulative labor. The shaft had to be selected from straight wood, cut, dried, and shaped. The point had to be forged or traded for. The fletching had to be harvested and attached. An arrow is actually a fairly complex piece of technology when you break down all its components. The work continues, the afternoon passing in productive rhythm. Equipment gets repaired, materials get processed, and the camp gradually prepares itself for tomorrow's relocation. This is the hidden labor of nomadic life, not the dramatic cavalry charges or the exotic customs, but the constant, necessary maintenance that keeps everything functioning. Your shoulders ache slightly from this morning's archery practice. Your hands are stained with leather dye and slightly sore from stitching. You're tired but satisfied, the kind of productive fatigue that comes from useful work completed, and there's still more to do before the day ends. As you watch your wife work on the wool processing, it occurs to you not for the first time that the popular image of nomadic women as passive, oppressed figures is hilariously inaccurate. Your wife owns property independently of you. She manages significant portions of the household economy. She can divorce you if you're insufficiently useful or excessively problematic, and she'd keep her property when she left. Try explaining that to a medieval European peasant woman whose legal existence is essentially subsumed into her husband's, and watch the cognitive dissonance happen in real time. The women gathered around the wool processing area represent significant economic power. They're not just doing domestic chores, they're managing production systems that generate tradable wealth. That felt your wife is making? It's valuable. That leather work being done by your neighbor's wife? Also valuable. The cheese, the processed wool, the woven textiles, all of it represents economic output that women control, trade, and profit from independently. Your wife notices you watching and raises an eyebrow. "Are you going to help or just observe?" she asks, and there's amusement in her tone, but also a genuine question. Men sometimes help with wool processing, especially when there's a lot to do. It's not considered women's work exclusively, just work that women happen to do most of, because the division of labor here is practical rather than rigidly ideological. You join the group, sitting down to help pick debris from raw fleece. It's tedious work, requiring attention to detail as you pull out bits of vegetation, dried dung, and other contaminants. The wool itself is greasy with lanolin, and your fingers quickly develop that distinctive waxy coating. This lanolin is actually valuable. It'll be collected during the washing process and used for waterproofing and leather treatment. Even the waste products have value in this economy. A mainstream historical fact: Mongol women could own and inherit property, initiate divorce, participate in tribal councils, and in some cases even lead military units. This was so unusual compared to contemporary societies that foreign observers often commented on it with a mixture of admiration and scandal. Persian chroniclers noted that Mongol women rode horses, managed businesses, and spoke freely in mixed company behavior that would have been unthinkable for women in their own societies. The legal code known as the yasa specifically protected women's property rights and inheritance claims. The conversation around the wool processing area is lively, covering everything from tomorrow's move logistics to gossip about a family, 2 camps over to a detailed discussion of which trading post offers the best exchange rates for felt. These aren't frivolous domestic conversations. It's economic planning, logistical coordination, and information sharing that directly impacts household wealth and survival. Your mother-in-law, an intimidating woman in her 50s who's forgotten more about steppe survival than most people ever learn, is holding forth on the quality of this season's wool. Too much vegetable matter, she declares, holding up a particularly contaminated clump. The grazing area had too many thistles. Next year we should avoid that valley in spring. She's right, of course. She's usually right about these things, which is why her advice carries weight not just in your family, but throughout the camp. The economic contributions of women in Mongol society are substantial and recognized. While men focus on herding, hunting, and military activities, women manage the household economy, process raw materials into valuable goods, and often handle the trading that converts those goods into other necessities. This isn't a secondary or supplementary role, it's foundational to how the economy functions. A quirky detail that surprises many people: Mongol women sometimes went to war alongside men, and there are documented cases of women commanding military units or defending camps during raids. European crusaders encountered Mongol female warriors and were utterly baffled, having no cultural framework for understanding women as combat participants. Some chroniclers claimed these must have been men dressed as women, because the alternative, that women could actually fight, was apparently too conceptually challenging to accept. Your white sister joins the group, bringing news from her own household. She's recently traded a batch of felt to a passing merchant caravan for bronze cookware and some luxury items, including a small mirror, which she displays with obvious pride. The mirror is a Han Chinese product, beautifully polished bronze that reflects clearly. It's expensive, representing serious wealth, and the fact that she made this purchase independently with goods she produced and traded herself illustrates the economic autonomy women possess here. "My husband wanted me to trade for more arrows," she says with a shrug, "but we have enough arrows, and I wanted the mirror." So, there's no defensiveness in her tone, no sense that she's justifying a decision she needed permission for. She made an economic choice, and her husband's opinion was noted but not determinative. This is just how things work. The property ownership situation is particularly interesting when you think about it. Your wife owns her own animals, several horses, some sheep, a particularly productive milk cow. She inherited these from her mother, and they remain hers regardless of your marriage status. If you die, she keeps them. If she divorces you, she takes them with her. If she wants to sell them and buy something else, that's her decision. You might discuss it. Marriage ideally involves consultation, but ultimately, her property is hers to manage. Historians still argue whether this relative gender equality was a product of nomadic lifestyle requirements, where everyone's labor was essential to survival, or whether it reflected deeper cultural values about individual autonomy and merit. The practical argument is compelling. In a mobile society where you might need to pack up and leave at a moment's notice, having all adults capable of making decisions and managing resources independently is a survival advantage. But there's also evidence of ideological commitments to personal capability mattering more than gender, which suggests this wasn't purely practical. The wool processing continues, hands moving in practiced rhythms, conversation flowing naturally. Your wife's mother talks about a daughter-in-law who's pregnant with her first child, offering advice about what to expect and how to prepare. Another woman mentions concerns about a sick sheep in her flock, and immediately several others offer suggestions based on their own experiences with similar problems. This is community knowledge sharing, the oral tradition that preserves practical wisdom across generations. You notice that decision-making in these conversations is collaborative but not hierarchical in the way you'd see in many sedentary societies. Older women have respect and their advice carries weight, but younger women aren't afraid to disagree or offer alternative perspectives. The discussion about tomorrow's move route, for instance, involves multiple viewpoints about which path offers the best grazing versus which offers better water access, and nobody's opinion is dismissed just because of their age or status. The legal protections for women in Mongol society were actually quite sophisticated when you compare them to contemporary civilizations. Women could testify in disputes, own businesses, manage property, and even serve as regents or political leaders in certain circumstances. There are records of Mongol women serving as diplomatic envoys, managing vast estates while their husbands were on campaign, and wielding significant political influence. This wasn't universally progressive. There were definitely limitations and inequalities. But compared to most medieval societies, Mongol women had remarkably robust legal standing. Your daughter, that 12-year-old who was helping with riding instruction earlier, sits down to join the wool processing. She's learning these skills just as she's learning riding and archery, because competence in Mongol society isn't gender segregated in the rigid ways you see elsewhere. She'll need to know how to process wool and make felt, yes, but she'll also need to know how to ride, shoot, and fight if necessary. The goal is capability, not conformity to narrow gender roles. The afternoon light continues to fade slowly, the shadows lengthening across the steppe. The wool pile is gradually decreasing as it's processed, cleaned, and prepared for the next stages of production. Your hands are tired from the detailed work of picking debris, and you're ready to move on to other tasks. But there's satisfaction in the collective labor, in the productive conversation, in being part of a system where everyone's contributions are valued and recognized. Your wife catches your eye and smiles slightly, and you're reminded again that she chose to marry you not because her father arranged it or because she had limited options, but because she assessed your capabilities and decided you'd be a useful partner. That evaluation went both ways, of course, but the point is that marriage here is a partnership between equals who bring different but comparably valuable skills to the household economy. You stand, stretching out the stiffness from sitting too long in one position. The wool processing will continue without you. Plenty of hands remain to finish the work, and there are other tasks calling for your attention as the day moves toward evening and tomorrow's relocation approaches. As the afternoon wears on, you notice a group of men and older boys gathering in an open area away from the gurs. It's time for what Mongols call the three manly skills: archery, horse riding, and wrestling. Though you've already done archery this morning, so today's focus is on wrestling. This isn't just recreational activity or showing off, though both elements are definitely present. This is practical combat training disguised as entertainment, a way to maintain the physical skills and competitive edge that make Mongol warriors so effective in battle. Wrestling on the steppe isn't the highly regulated weight class divided sport you might be familiar with from modern contexts. This is practical grappling that translates directly to combat situation show to throw an opponent, how to maintain balance, how to use leverage instead of pure strength. The techniques you're practicing here are the same ones that will save your life if you're ever unhorsed during a raid or need to subdue an enemy without killing them. You join the group, which ranges from boys in their early teens to men in their 40s. Age matters less than skill, though obviously there's some practical matching. A 13-year-old isn't going to square off against a grown warrior in his prime unless he's spectacularly talented or spectacularly stupid. The wrestling area is just a clear patch of grass. No ring or boundary markers needed. You'll know when you've lost because you'll be on the ground. Two younger men are already engaged, circling each other with arms extended, looking for an opening. Wrestling matches start from standing position, and the goal is straightforward. Throw your opponent so that their upper body touches the ground. It doesn't matter if it's their shoulder, their back, or their face. Ground contact above the waist means you've lost. This rule creates a style of wrestling that's all about balance, leverage, and timing rather than ground fighting or submission holds. One wrestler lunges, grabbing his opponent's arm and attempting a throw. The other counters, shifting his weight, and suddenly they're locked together, each trying to unbalance the other. Muscles strain, feet shuffle for position. Then one wrestler finds the right angle, executes a hip throw, and his opponent hits the grass with a solid thud. Match over. Both men stand, clasp hands briefly, and the winner moves on to face the next challenger. A mainstream historical fact, Mongolian wrestling known as bukwas, one of the 3 manly games that were central to Mongol culture and military training. The other 2 were horse racing and archery, collectively forming the Naadam festival that's still celebrated in Mongolia today. These weren't just sports, they were systematic training programs that kept warriors physically fit and combat ready even during peacetime. Champions at these games received significant social prestige and material rewards. You step forward for your match, facing off against a man roughly your age and build. You both adopt the traditional stance bent forward at the waist, arms extended, watching each other's movements. There's a moment of assessment where you're reading his balance, his weight distribution, looking for weaknesses to exploit. He's doing the same to you. This is chess with bodies, each move requiring anticipation of counter moves. He makes the first move, reaching for your shoulder. You sidestep, grab his extended arm, and attempt a throw. He's ready for it, planting his feet and countering with a grab at your waist. You're locked together now, both trying to find the leverage point that will send the other to the ground. Your feet shuffle, seeking stable positions. Your muscles burn with effort. This is exhausting work, and matches can last several minutes when opponents are evenly matched. You feel him shift his weight slightly to his right, and you immediately exploit it, sweeping his left leg while pulling his upper body in the opposite direction. He starts to go down, but at the last second he twists and manages to land on his hands and knees, which doesn't count as a loss because his upper body didn't touch the ground. You both reset, breathing hard now, and re-engage. The second exchange is quicker. He commits to a throw attempt that's just slightly overextended, and you use his momentum against him, redirecting his energy and sending him stumbling forward. He tries to recover, but you're already moving, getting behind him and executing a throw that lands him flat on his back. Ground contact. Match over. A quirky historical detail that often surprises people. Mongol wrestlers traditionally wore special clothing, a small vest that left the chest exposed and tight shorts. The exposed chest thing has a fascinating origin story, supposedly. A woman once entered a wrestling tournament disguised as a man and won, so the open chest requirement was instituted to prevent this from happening again. Whether this story is historical fact or legendary justification is something historians still argue about. But either way, the dress code persists in traditional Mongolian wrestling to this day. You help your opponent up. Wrestling is competitive, but not hostile, and he nods acknowledgement of your victory. You're breathing hard, sweaty, despite the relatively cool air, feeling that deep muscle fatigue that comes from explosive physical effort. Wrestling matches might only last a few minutes, but they're incredibly demanding minutes. Other matches are happening simultaneously. Two teenagers are grappling with the uncoordinated enthusiasm of youth, all energy and limited technique. An older warrior is methodically dismantling a younger opponent, using minimal effort and maximum leverage. A masterclass in efficiency. Children too young to participate are watching intently, learning by observation, mentally cataloguing the techniques they see. The wrestling continues, informal brackets forming as winners face winners, and those who lost their matches step aside to rest and watch. There's running commentary from spectators, advice shouted to wrestlers, laughter when someone attempts an ambitious throw that backfires spectacularly. This is entertainment, but it's also serious. The skills being practiced here directly translate to survival in combat situations. You face another opponent, this one noticeably larger and stronger than you. Pure strength isn't everything in wrestling. Technique and timing matter more, but it certainly doesn't hurt. You'll need to be smarter than him, faster, more precise. The match begins, and immediately you can feel his superior strength when you lock up. He's pushing you backward, forcing you to give ground. You can't match his power directly, so you don't try. Instead, you wait for an opening, and when he overcommits to a forward push, you sidestep and redirect his momentum, using his own strength to throw him off balance. He doesn't go down too experienced for that, but you've created space and reset the engagement on more favorable terms. You circle each other, and he's more cautious now, respecting your technique. The second exchange is longer, both of you testing and probing, neither willing to make a mistake. Finally, you attempt a leg sweep combined with an upper body pull, and it almost works, but he manages to hop over your sweeping leg and countergrab. You're locked together again, straining against each other, and then his superior strength till she lifts you slightly off balance and throws you hard to the grass. You land on your shoulder and back. Ground contact. Loss. You stand, shake his hand, and step aside. No shame in losing to a clearly superior opponent. The point is practice, improvement, maintaining skills. You'll face him again another day, and maybe you'll have developed a counter to his strength advantage. Or maybe he'll just be better than you, and that's fine too. Not everyone can be the champion. Historians still argue whether the three manly games were primarily practical military training or whether they served broader social functions related to status display, mate selection, and cultural identity. The practical military application is undeniable. Archery, riding, and wrestling are combat skills, but the elaborate social rituals surrounding competitions suggest these games carried meaning beyond mere training exercises. Champions gained prestige, attracted better marriage prospects, and secured elevated social positions, indicating that prowess in these skills signaled broader qualities valued by Mongol society. The wrestling session gradually winds down as participants tire and the afternoon light shifts toward evening. Bodies are sore, muscles fatigued, but there's satisfaction in the physical exertion and the skills practiced. You're breathing hard, sweaty, feeling pleasantly exhausted in the way that comes from sustained physical challenge. Tomorrow you'll probably be sore. Wrestling uses muscles that don't get worked during normal daily activities, but that's a small price for maintaining combat readiness. Children who've been watching now attempt their own wrestling matches, miniature versions of the adult competitions. They're terrible at it, all enthusiasm and no technique, but they're learning. A 5-year-old manages to throw another 5-year-old, and his victory celebration involves running in circles shouting, which is probably age-appropriate, but also absolutely not how adult winners behave. Everyone finds this hilarious. You head back toward your ger, feeling the pleasant fatigue of physical training completed. The sun is getting lower now, the light golden and warm, casting long shadows across the steppe. Evening is approaching, bringing its own rhythms and routines, and you're ready for whatever comes next. As evening approaches, you notice smoke rising from near the camp's edge. Not cooking smoke, but something different, something intentional. The camp's shaman is performing a ritual, and while this isn't exactly a scheduled event, it's also not surprising. Shamanic practices on the steppe are woven into daily life rather than reserved for special occasions, a practical spirituality that addresses immediate concerns like illness, bad luck, or upcoming journeys rather than abstract theological questions. You wander over to observe along with several other curious camp members. The shaman, an older man with a weathered face and eyes that seem to look through things rather than at Themis burning juniper branches in a small fire, creating thick, aromatic smoke that rises in twisting columns. Juniper smoke is purifying, according to belief, capable of driving away evil spirits and cleansing people, animals, and objects. Whether you personally believe this or just go along with it because everyone else does is honestly between you and whatever spiritual framework you've developed over your lifetime. The shaman is dressed in his ritual clothing, special robe decorated with metal discs, bells, and strips of cloth that represent various spirits and powers. When he moves, the outfit makes a distinctive jingling sound that's simultaneously musical and slightly unsettling. His drum sits beside him, a round frame drum made from animal hides stretched over a wooden hoop, decorated with symbols whose meanings you only partially understand. A woman approaches with her young child, a girl who's been sick for several days. It's nothing life-threatening, just a persistent fever and cough that hasn't responded to herbal remedies. The mother is seeking spiritual intervention because, well, you try everything when your child is ill, and if practical medicine hasn't worked, maybe supernatural assistance will help, or maybe the illness will just run its course regardless. But doing something feels better than doing nothing. The shaman gestures for the mother and child to pass through the juniper smoke. They walk through it several times while the shaman chants in a rhythmic pattern that might be words or might just be vocalization. It's hard to tell, and maybe that's intentional. The smoke swirls around the child, and the mother looks hopeful, desperate, willing to believe that this will help. The shaman touches the child's forehead, says something too quiet for you to hear, and sends them on their way. The mother looks relieved. The child looks mostly confused. Whether this will actually cure the fever is anyone's guess, but the psychological comfort probably doesn't hurt. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol shamanism was a complex spiritual system that blended animism, ancestor worship, and practical magic. Shamans, both male and female, served as intermediaries between the human and spirit worlds, performing rituals for healing, divination, weather manipulation, and protection. The Mongol Empire's religious tolerance was famous, but traditional shamanic practices remained central to steppe culture even as Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam spread through different Mongol populations. Genghis Khan himself consulted shamans regularly, and his rise to power was partly legitimized through shamanistic prophecies. The shaman picks up his drum now and begins a different ritual, this one apparently for the camp's general protection and prosperity. The drum beat is steady, hypnotic, creating a rhythm that seems to bypass your brain and speak directly to something more primal. The sound carries across the steppe, and you can feel it as much as hear it, a pulse that synchronizes with your heartbeat. The shaman's voice rises and falls, calling to spirits of the land, ancestors who've passed, protective forces that might or might not be listening. You're not entirely sure what you believe about all this. The practical side of you notes that shamanistic rituals often coincide with natural recovery from illness or just plain luck being interpreted as spiritual intervention. The cultural side of you recognizes that these practices bind the community together, create shared meaning, and provide psychological comfort during uncertain times. And maybe there's a part of you that wonders if there actually is something out there responding to these invocations, some layer of reality that exists alongside the mundane physical world. Ancestor worship is particularly strong in Mongol spirituality, and this makes practical sense when you think about it. Your ancestors survived this harsh environment and passed down knowledge that keeps you alive. Honoring them isn't just spiritual, it's acknowledging that you exist because they were successful. Small offerings are made to ancestor spirits, regularly milk poured on the ground, bits of food left out, prayers spoken before important undertakings. Whether the ancestors actually receive these offerings is unknowable, but the practice reinforces continuity between generations and reminds you that you're part of a chain stretching backward and forward through time, a quirky historical detail that surprises many people. Mongol shamans sometimes used hallucinogenic substances during their rituals, particularly mushrooms that grew on the steppe. These chemically induced visions were considered legitimate spiritual experiences, and shamans who could successfully navigate altered states of consciousness were respected for their ability to communicate with spirit worlds. European observers who learned about this practice were generally horrified, unable to distinguish between religious ecstasy and mere intoxication, though honestly the line between those categories is philosophically blurry even today. The drumming continues. The shaman entering what looks like a trance state or maybe just very committed performance. It's genuinely hard to tell. His eyes are closed, his body swaying, his voice rising in intensity. Some observers are clearly deeply engaged with the ritual, nodding along, their faces showing reverence. Others are watching with the polite attention you'd give any community event present, respectful, but not necessarily transported by mystical fervor. Your wife appears beside you, observing the ritual for a moment before commenting quietly, "He's good. Better than the shaman we had 3 camps ago." This pragmatic assessment of shamanic skill is entirely normal. Shamans aren't beyond criticism or comparison. If their rituals consistently fail to produce desired results, or if their divinations prove inaccurate too often, their reputation suffers and people consult other shamans. This is spirituality operating under market principles, provide value or lose customers. Historians still argue whether Mongol shamanism was primarily a belief system or a practical tool for psychological management and social cohesion. The evidence suggests it was both, inextricably intertwined. People genuinely believed in spirits, ancestors, and supernatural forces, while also recognizing that shamanistic rituals served practical functions like illness treatment, conflict resolution, and community bonding. The spiritual and pragmatic weren't in opposition. They were complementary aspects of the same cultural system. The ritual winds down, the drumming slowing and eventually stopping. The shaman opens his eyes, looking exhausted, whether from genuine spiritual exertion or just the physical demands of sustained performance, who knows. He accepts offerings from grateful camp members, a bite of cheese here, some dried meat there, nothing extravagant but enough to acknowledge his services. Shamans don't work for free, but they're also not charging exorbitant fees. This is community service that deserves compensation, not a profit-maximizing enterprise. The juniper smoke dissipates slowly, drifting across the camp and out into the open steppe. You can still smell it, sharp, clean, somehow both comforting and slightly ominous. Whether the ritual accomplished anything supernatural is unknowable, but it's accomplished something psychological and social. The community has come together, addressed shared concerns, and reaffirmed collective spiritual frameworks. And maybe that's enough, regardless of whether spirits are actually listening. You head back towards your gur as the evening deepens. The spiritual business of the day is concluded, but there are still practical matters requiring attention before tomorrow's move. The steppe is darkening, the sky transitioning through shades of gold and purple, and the camp is settling into its evening rhythms. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cuts through the evening air, fast and urgent, in a way that immediately signals this isn't just someone returning from checking on livestock. Everyone's attention shifts toward the sound, and you see a rider emerging from the dimming landscape, his horse moving at a pace that suggests important business. This is a messenger, and the fact that he's arrived at your particular camp means he's part of the relay system, that remarkable communication network that allows information to travel thousands of miles across the Mongol world with astonishing speed. The rider pulls up near the center of camp, his horse lathered with sweat and breathing hard. The messenger himself looks tired but alert, the kind of fatigue that comes from riding hard for extended periods. He dismounts with practiced efficiency, and the camp's headman is already approaching, because messages carried by relay riders are always significant. Nobody mobilizes the communication network for trivial matters. You join the gathering crowd, curious about what news is arriving. Relay messengers don't come through your area frequently, maybe once every few months, but when they do, they're carrying information that's been deemed important enough to send through the official channels. This could be military orders, news of political developments, information about trade opportunities, or warnings about threats. The system exists to move critical information quickly across distances that would otherwise fragment the empire into disconnected regions. The messenger accepts a skin of air egg from someone. Air relay riders are always offered refreshment upon arrival. It's basic hospitality and drinks deeply before speaking. "I carry messages from the Western Territories," he says, his voice hoarse from days of riding and shouting orders at relay stations. 3 items. First, tribute from the Western Kingdoms is being collected successfully. No major resistance. Second, there's been a dispute over grazing rights near the Altai region that needs mediation. Third, traders report good prices for felt and leather in the southern markets this season. The headman nods, processing this information. None of it requires immediate action from your particular camp, but all of it is useful to know. The tribute collection success means military campaigns in that direction are proceeding as planned. The grazing dispute might eventually require some households to relocate if the conflict escalates. The market information will influence trading decisions when your camp next interacts with merchant caravans. A mainstream historical fact, the Mongol relay system, known as the Yam or air tour, was one of the most sophisticated communication networks in the medieval world. Relay stations were positioned roughly 2,030 miles apart across major routes, and messengers could exchange tired horses for fresh ones at each station, allowing urgent messages to travel 200 miles per day or more. This was faster than any other communication system of the era, giving the Mongol Empire a massive strategic advantage in coordinating military campaigns and administering territories spanning from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean. The messenger will stay tonight, rest, and continue his route tomorrow. He's not finished. There are other camps to reach, other messages to deliver before he completes his circuit and can return to his home station. The life of a relay messenger is demanding, requiring excellent horsemanship, physical endurance, and the ability to memorize and accurately relay information across long distances. It's prestigious work, well compensated, but also exhausting and sometimes dangerous. Your wife's brother asks about family connections in the Western Territory. She has cousins who migrated that direction several years ago, and news travels slowly when you're not important enough to merit official relay messages. The messenger thinks for a moment, then shares what he's heard through informal channels. The cousins are doing well, their herds have grown, no major problems. This kind of secondary information sharing is how personal news travels across the empire, piggybacking on official communication routes. The messenger also carries physical items. You notice small packages wrapped in leather, letters written on birch bark or parchment for those rare individuals who can read and write. Literacy isn't common on the steppe, but it exists, particularly among traders, administrators, and religious figures. Written messages can convey more detail and precision than oral transmission, though they require the sender and recipient to share a writing system which isn't always guaranteed across the empire's diverse populations. A quirky historical detail that often surprises people, Mongol relay messengers carried special tablets called paiza that granted them authority to requisition horses, food, and shelter from any household along their route. These tablets were made of various materials, wood, silver, or gold, depending on the messenger's rank, and carried the imperial seal. Refusing to assist a messenger displaying a paiza was a serious offense, punishable by death in extreme cases. This system ensured relay efficiency, but also created opportunities for abuse, and there are records of authorities periodically cracking down on fake paiza or messengers exceeding their legitimate authority. The gathering begins to disperse as people process the information and return to their evening activities. The messenger is led to a gur, where he'll be fed, given a comfortable place to sleep, and provided with a fresh horse tomorrow morning. The camp's collective hospitality obligation has been triggered, and everyone will contribute something extra meat for his meal, a leather bag for carrying water, checking his equipment for damage that needs repair. You think about the network this messenger represents, the invisible web of routes and relay stations connecting your small camp to events happening thousands of miles away. A decision made in Karakorum, the Mongol capital, can reach you within weeks through this system. Military orders can coordinate campaigns across continents. Trade information allows economic optimization across vast distances. It's an administrative achievement that most sedentary civilizations of this era can't match, and it exists because the Mongol Empire recognized that controlling territory means nothing if you can't communicate with and administer that territory effectively. Historians still argue whether the Mongol relay system was primarily a military tool adapted for civilian use or vice versa. The evidence suggests it served both purposes simultaneously, with military and administrative messages sharing the same infrastructure. The system's efficiency was legendary. Marco Polo wrote extensively about it, noting that European kingdoms had nothing comparable and that the speed of Mongol communications seemed almost supernatural to outsiders unfamiliar with the relay station concept. The evening light is fading now, the sky deepening into twilight. The messenger's arrival has provided a brief connection to the wider world beyond your immediate horizon, a reminder that your small camp is part of something much larger. Tomorrow he'll ride on, carrying his messages to other camps, and the relay will continue its ceaseless operation, binding together an empire that stretches across half the known world. You head back toward your gur, thinking about those western territories, those southern markets, those distant conflicts and opportunities. Your life is here, on this specific patch of steppe, but you're connected through invisible threads to events and people you'll never meet, participating in an economic and political system that spans continents. It's easy to feel isolated when you're surrounded by endless grass and empty sky, but the relay system reminds you that isolation is an illusion. Information flows, connections persist, and the empire's reach extends even to remote camps like yours. The stars are beginning to appear now, brilliant points emerging from the darkening sky. Tomorrow brings the camp move, the journey to new grazing, the continuation of nomadic rhythms. But tonight, you've been reminded that your small world is nested inside a much larger one, and that somewhere far beyond the horizon, other people are living their own versions of steppe life, connected to you through the relay riders who carry news across impossible distances. As darkness settles fully over the steppe, people begin gravitating toward the center of camp where someone has built up a larger fire. This isn't a formal gathering, nobody issued invitations or set a specific time, but evening social time is a regular feature of camp life, and tonight is no exception. The day's work is done, stomachs are reasonably full, and there's time for the social bonding that keeps a community functioning smoothly. You grab your wooden cup and head toward the gathering, where someone has already brought out a large leather bag of airag. This evening, drinking isn't about getting drunk, though that can happen. It's about social ritual, hierarchy reinforcement, and community cohesion. The way alcohol is distributed and consumed here communicates information about status, respect, and relationships in ways that are obvious to participants but might seem bizarrely complex to outsiders. The seating arrangement is already taking shape, and it's not random. The camp's headman sits in the position of honor, furthest from the door if this were inside a gur, or in this case, closest to the fire's warmest side. Elder men sit near him, positioned according to a complex calculus of age, family connections, and personal achievements. Younger men sit further out. Women have their own section, with a similar internal hierarchy based on age and status. Children cluster at the periphery, learning by observation how these social rituals function. You take your position among the men of middle age and status, not at the center of power, but not relegated to the periphery either. Your place in this arrangement was earned through demonstrated capability. You're a competent archer, a decent wrestler, you manage your household effectively, and your family's herds are healthy. These accomplishments translate directly into social standing, which translates into where you sit during evening gatherings. The airag distribution begins, and this is where hierarchy becomes most visible. The headman's cup is filled first, always, without exception. He takes a ritual sip, not a full drink, just enough to acknowledge the offering, and then the serving moves to the next person in the status order. This isn't written down anywhere, and there's no explicit protocol being cited, but everyone knows the order because this knowledge is absorbed through years of observation. A mainstream historical fact. Mongol drinking customs were so precisely regulated by social hierarchy that foreign ambassadors often struggled to navigate them correctly, making errors, drinking out of turn, offering toasts to the wrong person first, refusing drinks inappropriately could cause serious diplomatic incidents. Several European envoys sent to Mongol courts wrote about the anxiety of trying to understand and follow drinking protocols that seemed impossibly complex but were second nature to Mongols who'd grown up with them. The airag makes its way around the circle, each person receiving their cup in proper order, drinking an appropriate amount, not too much, not too little, and passing it along. You receive your portion, drink, and pass the cup to the next person. The airag is slightly more fermented than the morning batch, with a stronger alcohol content and a sharper taste. It creates a pleasant warmth in your stomach, relaxing muscles tired from the day's work. Conversation flows naturally, covering the same territory that daytime discussions covered, but with a more relaxed tone. Tomorrow's move is discussed again, with additional details about route selection and timing. Someone mentioned seeing wolves in the distance yesterday, not close enough to threaten livestock, but close enough to warrant vigilance. Another person shares news from a relative who visited from a different camp several weeks ago. The social dynamics playing out here are subtle but significant. When the headman speaks, people listen attentively. When younger men offer opinions, they're heard but carry less weight unless they're particularly insightful. Women's conversations happen parallel to the men's, sometimes intersecting when topics affect everyone, sometimes remaining separate when they're dealing with gender-specific concerns. It's not that women's voices are ignored. Your wife, for instance, has significant influence in household and economic decisions. But the public evening gathering is a space where male hierarchy is most visibly performed. A quirky historical detail that surprises many people. Mongol drinking etiquette required that when receiving alcohol from someone of higher status, you had to accept it with your right hand while supporting your right elbow with your left hand, a gesture of respect that showed you valued the drink so much you needed both hands to receive it properly. Failing to perform this gesture was insulting, suggesting you didn't properly respect the person offering the drink. Europeans trying to follow this custom often got it wrong, leading to awkward moments and damaged relationships. More airag circulates, and the atmosphere becomes progressively more convivial. Jokes are told, some of them genuinely funny, others landing with the kind of polite acknowledgement you give when someone important tells a mediocre joke. The messenger who arrived earlier is present too, though positioned somewhat outside the normal hierarchy since he's a temporary visitor. He's treated with respect. Relay messengers have status, but he's not integrated into the camp's internal social structure. Someone starts singing, one of those traditional long songs where single syllables can stretch across multiple notes and the melodies seem to mirror the endless horizons of the steppe. The singer's voice is clear and strong, rising into the night air, and conversation pauses to listen. This is entertainment, yes, but it's also cultural transmission, these songs carrying histories and values across generations. The melody is haunting, beautiful in a way that's hard to articulate, and for a moment everyone is united in listening, hierarchy temporarily suspended by shared aesthetic experience. The song ends, and someone else offers a different one, more upbeat, with a rhythmic quality that has people nodding along. Children are getting sleepy now, some already being carried back to their gurs by mothers who've decided they've had enough social time for one evening. The gathering will continue for another hour or so, but it's beginning its natural wind down. You drink more airag, feeling the cumulative effects of the alcohol, not drunk, but definitely relaxed, muscles loose, thoughts flowing easily. This is the point where the day's tensions dissolve, where social bonds strengthen through shared leisure, where the camp becomes more than just a collection of households camping near each other and transforms into a genuine community. Historians still argue whether Mongol social hierarchy was primarily rigid or fluid, fixed by birth or determined by merit. The evidence suggests it was both, in complicated ways. Lineage mattered. Being descended from prestigious families carried weight, but individual capability could elevate or diminish status. A man from a minor family who proved exceptional in warfare or herding could rise in standing, while a man from a prestigious family who proved incompetent would lose respect. The evening gathering reflects this hybrid system. Seating arrangements acknowledge both inherited status and earned respect. The fire burns lower, its flames settling into glowing coals. The air rag supply is diminishing, though not exhausted. Knowing when to stop is part of the social skill here. You're satisfied, socially and physically, ready to retreat to your gur for the night. The gathering is breaking up naturally, people standing, stretching, saying their goodbyes and heading back to their families. You walk back to your gur with your wife, the stars brilliant overhead, the night air cool and clean. Tomorrow brings the camp move, but tonight has provided the social reinforcement that makes nomadic community life possible. You know your place, everyone knows theirs, and the evening has confirmed that the social order is stable and functioning as it should. The evening social time was pleasant, but there's still one crucial task before you can truly settle in for the night, bringing the livestock closer to camp. Throughout the day, the animals have been grazing at varying distances, following the good grass wherever they found it, but as darkness falls, predators become active, and leaving your wealth scattered across the steppe is an invitation for trouble. Wolves, wild dogs, and human thieves all prefer twilight operations, so you need to consolidate your herds before full darkness settles. You're not alone in this task. Several other men and a few older children are already moving toward where the livestock have spread out during the day. The horses are relatively easy. They're intelligent enough to understand the evening routine and often start drifting back toward camp on their own as daylight fades. You can see them in the dimming light, dark shapes against the grey-brown grass, already heading in the right direction. A few whistles and calls, and they're moving purposefully campward. The sheep are more problematic, as usual. They've clustered together about a quarter-mile from camp, doing their sheep thing of simultaneously being in a tight group and also being completely oblivious to anything happening beyond their immediate grazing. You approach the flock from the far side, making noise to get their attention and start them moving toward camp. Sheep respond well to being herded from behind. They want to move away from pressure, so you walk slowly, arms spread, creating a presence that encourages forward movement. One of your neighbors is working the other flank of the combined flock, and together you guide the sheep toward camp. They move reluctantly, stopping frequently to grab a few more mouthfuls of grass, because sheep are constitutionally incapable of passing up food even when being actively herded. Your Dogaline rough-coated animal bred for herding work helps by running along the edges of the flock, nipping at stragglers and keeping the group consolidated. The dog knows this routine better than anyone, having done it every single evening for years. A mainstream historical fact, Mongol herding dogs were crucial to livestock management, specifically bred for aggression toward predators and strangers, but docility toward family members and livestock. These dogs were large, powerful animals capable of fighting off wolves, and their presence alone deterred many predatory threats. Marco Polo described Mongol herding dogs as large as donkeys, and noted that they could bring down wild animals. While this was probably exaggeration, the dogs were definitely substantial and effective. The goats have scattered more widely than the sheep naturally, because goats are individualists who reject the concept of staying with the group. You can see several of them on a small rise about 200 paces from camp, and someone's going to have to go collect them specifically. Your son volunteers for this task, heading off with the kind of exaggerated determination that suggests he's turning a mundane chore into a personal quest. The goats see him coming and immediately start moving, though not necessarily in the direction he wants them to go, because goats are agents of chaos who exist to frustrate herders. The cattle are already close, having never wandered far during the day. They're content to graze the area near camp and don't have the sheep's nervous energy or the goat's wanderlust. A few calls, and they lumber closer to the camp perimeter, completely unbothered by the evening routine. One cow has a calf that's playing rather than staying with its mother, running in small circles and making those bouncing leaps that young cattle do when they're feeling energetic. The calf will learn proper evening protocol eventually, but for now, it's just being a calf. The camels require almost no management. They're already positioned where you want them, having apparently decided on their own that being near camp at night is preferable to being exposed on the open steppe. Camels are intelligent and somewhat antisocial animals who make their own decisions and grudgingly tolerate human guidance. You appreciate them anyway, even if they do radiate permanent dissatisfaction with everything. Orchestrated livestock narrative expansion with historical and scholarly elements. I need to continue describing the livestock roundup, touching on the security concerns, predator threats, and the practical aspects of evening management. I should include the historical detail, the quirky fact, and the scholarly debate as required. I'm at about 600 words so far, need to get to 1000 and 1001. As the animals consolidate closer to camp, you can see the defensive perimeter taking shape. The livestock won't be pen-end. There aren't permanent corrals on the steppe, but they'll be kept within a few hundred paces of the gers, close enough that human presence deters most predatory threats, and close enough that you can respond quickly if problems arise. Dogs will patrol the edges throughout the night, and human guards will take shifts, watching for both animal and human threats. The light is fading fast now, that brief period between sunset and full darkness when visibility drops rapidly. This is the most dangerous time, when predators can move with some concealment but still see well enough to hunt effectively. Wolves are the primary concern. They're intelligent pack hunters who've learned that scattered livestock represent easy meals. A healthy adult horse or cow can defend itself, but sheep are vulnerable, and young animals of any species are targets. You scan the horizon, looking for movement or shapes that seem wrong. Wolf attacks on well-guarded camps are rare but not unheard of, and vigilance now prevents problems later. You see nothing concerning, just the darkening steppe and the first stars emerging overhead. The dogs are alert, though, their heads up and noses testing the wind for sense of potential threats. If wolves were nearby, the dogs would know before you did. A quirky historical detail that surprises people, Mongol herders sometimes used a technique called false camp to protect livestock from thieves. They'd set up a few gers in one location, but keep the main herd at a different, less visible location some distance away. Thieves raiding what they thought was the main camp would find minimal animals, while the real wealth remained hidden. This worked best in terrain with some elevation variation, but even on flat steppe, carefully managing sight lines and using darkness could make herds effectively invisible to raiders. The sheep are finely consolidated, milling around in that anxious way sheep have when they're not entirely sure what's happening, but are pretty sure they should be worried about it. Your dog settles nearby, still alert but relaxed, now that the flock is where it should be. The goats have been successfully retrieved by your son, who returns looking triumphant, despite the fact that this was not actually a difficult task. You nod acknowledgement anyway, because positive reinforcement encourages willing participation in future chores. The horses are grazing peacefully close to camp, their presence both an asset, they're valuable, and a security measure. Horses are alert animals whose behavior provides early warning of threats. If the horses suddenly spook or show alarm, everyone in camp will wake immediately. They're better than any human guard for detecting approaching danger, though they can't actually fight off threats, so human guards are still necessary. Historians still argue whether nighttime livestock management was primarily about predator protection or theft prevention. The evidence suggests both were significant concerns, varying by region and political stability. In areas with strong central authority and established grazing territories, predators were the main threat. In frontier regions or during periods of conflict, human thieves were more concerning. Your camp, positioned in relatively stable territory, worries more about wolves than raiders, but you'd be foolish to ignore either possibility completely. The last light fades from the sky, and the steppe transitions into full darkness. The livestock are settled, close enough to camp for protection, but far enough that they're not literally trampling through your living space. Dogs are positioned strategically, alert to their guard duties. The first shift of human guards is organizing itself. Men who'll spend the next few hours watching and listening while others sleep. You head back toward your ger, satisfied that your wealth is as safe as you can make it. Tomorrow you'll move all these animals to new grazing, but tonight they're consolidated, guarded, and reasonably secure. The evening livestock roundup is complete. One more daily task checked off the endless list that keeps nomadic life functioning smoothly. Back near the central fire, which has been built up again with fresh fuel, people are gathering for what might be the most important cultural activity of nomadic life, storytelling. This isn't Netflix or books or any of the passive entertainment you might be used to. This is live oral tradition, the primary method through which history, values, and identity are transmitted across generations. In a culture with limited literacy, stories aren't just entertainment, they're the archives, the textbooks, and the cultural glue that holds everything together. An older man named Batuane of the camp's recognized storytellisis, settling into position near the fire. He's in his 60s, with a face like weathered leather and a voice that can project across remarkable distances when needed. Batu knows dozens of epic tales, historical narratives and legends, all committed to memory through decades of repetition and performance. He's not reading from anything because there's nothing to read from. These stories exist entirely in human memory, passed from one generation to the next through careful preservation and performance. People arrange themselves around the fire in a loose semicircle, children in front where they can see and hear clearly, adults behind and around the edges. This audience arrangement has happened without any explicit direction. Everyone just knows where they should be. The fire provides light and warmth, creating a bubble of visibility in the surrounding darkness. Beyond the firelight, the steppe stretches away into blackness, and the stars overhead are impossibly bright, so numerous that the Milky Way looks like a river of light flowing across the sky. Batu begins without preamble, his voice dropping into the rhythmic cadence of practiced storytelling. In the time when the world was young and the sky touched the earth, there was a hero named Geza Khan, and his deeds were such that the mountains still remember them. The opening formula signals that this is one of the great epic cycles, stories that can take hours to tell in full, though tonight Batu will likely share just one episode from the larger narrative. The Geza Khan epic is enormously popular across Central Asian cultures, existing in dozens of regional variations. The Mongol version features a divine hero who descends from heaven to fight demons and protect humanity, combining elements of shamanic spirituality, Buddhist influence, and indigenous mythology into a sprawling narrative that's been refined over centuries. The story has standard element heroic battles, supernatural opponents, dramatic transformations. But skilled storytellers add their own embellishments and emphasis, making each performance unique while maintaining the core narrative. A mainstream historical fact, oral epic poetry, was central to Mongol cultural identity, with professional storytellers commanding significant respect and material support. The most famous Mongol epic was The Secret History of the Mongols, which chronicled Genghis Khan's rise to power and the early Mongol Empire. While eventually written down, it originated as oral tradition, and storytellers who could recite it from memory were valued for preserving historical and cultural knowledge. These epic narratives weren't just entertainment. They encoded moral lessons, historical precedents, and cultural values that shaped Mongol identity. Batu's voice rises and falls with the narrative's emotional beats, growing urgent during battle scenes, softening during moments of reflection, taking on different qualities for different characters. This is performance. As much as recitation, Hayes not just repeating words, he's embodying the story, making it live for the audience. Children are transfixed, their eyes wide, completely absorbed in the narrative. Even adults who've heard this story multiple times before are engaged because a skilled telling can make familiar material feel fresh and immediate. The story Batu is telling tonight involves Geza Khan battling a demon who's been terrorizing human settlements, stealing livestock, and causing general chaos. The demon is powerful, nearly invincible, and Geza must use cunning as well as strength to defeat it. This is a common pattern in the epic. Raw power alone is never sufficient. Heroes must also demonstrate intelligence, strategic thinking, and sometimes even trickery. These narrative patterns communicate values. Yes, physical capability matters, but mental acuity and adaptability are equally essential. You find yourself drawn into the story despite knowing how it ends. There's something compelling about the oral performance, the way Batu's voice creates vivid mental images, the shared experience of listening collectively. This is how your ancestors experienced stories for countless generations before yours, and how your descendants will likely continue experiencing them. The technology is ancient and unchanged human voice, human memory, human audience, but it remains remarkably effective. A quirky historical detail that often surprises people. Mongol epic storytellers sometimes performed for days or even weeks, telling extended story cycles that could encompass thousands of lines of verse. Audiences would come and go, attending different sections of the narrative, and skilled storytellers could pick up at any point without needing to start from the beginning. This was entertainment, certainly, but also a form of cultural education and historical preservation. Young people learned about heroic ideals, proper behavior, tactical thinking, and cultural identity through these extended narrative performances. The children in the front row are completely absorbed, occasionally making small sounds of excitement or concern during particularly dramatic moments. They're learning not just the story, the cultural values embedded in it: courage, cleverness, respect for supernatural forces, the importance of protecting community. These lessons aren't delivered as explicit instruction, but absorbed through narrative, which is actually a more effective teaching method than direct lecturing would be. Batu reaches the climax of tonight's episode, where Geza Khan finally discovers the demon's vulnerability and exploits it, defeating the monster through a combination of strength and strategic insight. The audience lets out a collective breath, and children who'd been tensely watching now relax and smile. The hero won, as he always does in these stories, and the community is reminded that threats can be overcome, that courage and intelligence triumph over chaos and evil. The story concludes with the traditional closing formula, and Batu returns to his normal speaking voice, the performance spell broken. There's a moment of transition as the audience shifts from the narrative world back to present reality. Someone offers Batu a cup of airag, which he accepts with a nod. Storytelling is thirsty work, and proper hospitality requires refreshment for the performer. Historians still argue whether oral epic traditions were primarily historical records or mythological constructs, but the answer is probably both, inseparably intertwined. Stories preserve genuine historical memory names of actual leaders, descriptions of real battles, accounts of migrations and conflicts, but they also layer supernatural elements, moral lessons, and narrative patterns that make the stories meaningful across generations. The Geza Khan epic might not be historically accurate in a modern scholarly sense, but it's culturally true in ways that matter more to its audience than factual precision would be. The fire burns lower, and people begin drifting back to their gurs. Tomorrow's move requires good rest, and it's getting late. Children are sleepy now, the excitement of the story giving way to exhaustion. You stand, feeling the pleasant fatigue of a full day's work completed, ready to retreat to your gur for the night. The stars overhead continue their slow rotation, those same stars that have witnessed countless generations of Mongol storytellers performing these same narratives around campfires across endless centuries. The stories persist, the traditions continue, and you're part of an unbroken chain stretching backward and forward through time, connected to ancestors and descendants through shared cultural memory preserved in oral tradition. You don't get to sleep quite yet. Tonight is your turn in the watch rotation, that necessary security measure that keeps the camp and its livestock safe during darkness hours. Guard duty isn't glamorous, it's actually boring most of the time, standing or sitting in the darkness, listening for threats that usually don't materialize, but it's absolutely essential. The camps that skip night watches are the ones that wake up to find their horses stolen or their sheep scattered by wolves, so you accept this responsibility without complaint. The watch rotation is organized informally but effectively. The camp has perhaps a dozen able-bodied adults capable of standing guard, and shifts are divided into roughly 3-hour blocks throughout the night. You've drawn the middle shift, which means you got to participate in the evening storytelling, but now need to stay awake while others sleep. It's not ideal, but it's better than the pre-dawn shift, which requires waking up from deep sleep to stand watch during the coldest, darkest hours before sunrise. You grab your bow and quiver always, your bow, even for guard duty, because it's your primary defensive weapon and the one you're most skilled with. You also carry a knife at your belt, though honestly, if you're reduced to knife fighting during a raid, things have gone catastrophically wrong. The bow gives you range, the ability to engage threats before they reach the camp, and that's your best defensive option. Some guards also carry spears or clubs, but archery is your specialty, so you stick with what you know. The previous guard, a man named Timur, who's roughly your ages, waiting at the designated watch position on the camp's northern perimeter. He looks cold and bored, which is the default state for night guards. Nothing has happened during his shift, which is good news, but also means he spent 3 hours standing in the darkness with nothing to do but think, and occasionally pace to stay warm. Quiet night, he reports, which is all the briefing you need. Heard wolves howling maybe an hour ago, but they were distant, probably 5 miles out. Nothing approached the camp. The horses are settled, sheep are clustered up tight, everything normal. You nod acknowledgement, and Timur heads back to his ger, undoubtedly relieved to be done with guard duty and ready to collapse into sleep. You're alone now, or at least as alone as you can be while surrounded by a camp of sleeping people and hundreds of animals. The darkness is profound. There's no moon tonight, and the only light comes from stars and the dying embers of the central fire. Your eyes adjust gradually, and the steppe takes on that strange quality of nighttime vision where everything is visible, but nothing has color, just shades of grey and black. The watch position isn't formally defined. You're supposed to patrol the camp's perimeter, staying mobile, checking different angles, making sure you're not predictable. Wolves and thieves both exploit patterns, so you vary your route, sometimes walking clockwise around the camp, sometimes counterclockwise, occasionally cutting across to check on livestock clusters. The movement also helps you stay warm and alert. Standing still in the cold darkness is a recipe for drowsiness, and falling asleep on guard duty is not just personally dangerous, but a violation of collective trust. A mainstream historical fact, night watch rotation was universal among nomadic pastoral societies, not just Mongols. The vulnerability of livestock to predation and theft made constant vigilance necessary, and communities that failed to maintain effective guard systems simply didn't survive long. Mongol military discipline adapted these civilian watch practices into highly effective sentry systems for military camps, with severe punishments for guards who slept on duty, sometimes execution, depending on circumstances and the commander's temperament. You walk slowly around the camp's edge, your boots making soft sounds in the grass, your breath visible in the cold air. The temperature has dropped significantly since sunset, as it always does on the steppe. You're wearing your heavy wool deal and a felt hat, but you can still feel the cold working its way into your bones. This is autumn, not yet winter. Brutal, but definitely past summer. Comfortable. Winter guard duty will be considerably worse, standing watch in temperatures that can drop far below freezing, but that's a problem for future you. The animals are quiet, which is reassuring. Livestock have excellent senses, better than yours in most ways, and they'll react to threats before you detect them. The horses are resting in loose groups, some standing, some lying down. Sheep are huddled together in their characteristic tight cluster, that defensive instinct that's their primary survival strategy. The cattle are dark shapes against darker grass, barely visible, but their presence marked by occasional movement or the sound of chewing as they continue night grazing. You pause, listening carefully. The steppe at night has its own soundscape, wind moving through grass, distant animal calls, the subtle creaking and rustling of a landscape that's never truly silent. You're listening for sounds that don't belong. The coordinated movement of wolf packs, the creak of leather that might indicate mounted raiders, the nervous bleating of sheep reacting to nearby predators. Nothing concerning reaches your ears, just the normal ambient noise of a calm night. The stars overhead are spectacular, so numerous and bright that they cast actual shadows. You can see the Milky Way clearly, that river of light that features in so many Mongol myths and legends. The constellations are familiar friends. You've been reading the stars since childhood, using them for navigation and timekeeping. Right now, based on the stars' positions, you estimate you're about an hour into your shift, with 2 more hours to go before your replacement arrives. A quirky historical detail that surprises people, Mongol guards sometimes used a technique called listening to the earth, where they'd lie flat on the ground and put their ear to the soil. This allowed them to detect the vibrations of approaching horses or large animal groups from remarkable distant sesame times several miles away, giving advance warning that standing guards might miss. The technique required practice to distinguish different types of movement and estimate distances, but experienced guards could identify whether approaching horses were running or walking, and roughly how many there were. You hear wolves howling in the distance, just as Timur mentioned. The sound is eerie, carrying across the empty landscape multiple voices in a chorus that sounds both beautiful and threatening. You estimate they're several miles away, too distant to be an immediate concern, but you make a mental note of their direction and pay extra attention to the livestock. The horses' ears are forward, alert to the sound, but they're not panicking. They know the difference between distant wolves and imminent threats. The dogs patrolling the livestock edges are more alert now, their heads up, testing the wind. If the wolves approach closer, the dogs would raise alarm, barking aggressively and possibly moving to intercept. Mongol herding dogs are bred to be aggressive toward predators, and while a single dog wouldn't face a wolf pack alone, the noise would wake the camp and bring human assistance. The layered security system dogs for detection, humans for response works well most of the time. You continue your patrol, varying your route, checking different angles. The boredom is railguard duty, is mostly standing around in the darkness waiting for threats that don't materialize. But complacency kills, so you maintain focus, scanning the horizon, listening for unusual sounds, watching the livestock for behavioral changes that might signal approaching danger. Historians still argue whether night raids on camps were common or relatively rare. The evidence suggests it varied significantly by region and political stability. In frontier areas or during periods of conflict, raids were frequent enough that constant vigilance was essential. In more stable regions, with established territorial control, raids were rare, but the guard tradition persisted because the cost of maintaining watches was small compared to the catastrophic consequences of being unprepared during the rare occasions when raids did occur. The cold is working its way deeper now, and you stamp your feet and swing your arms periodically to maintain circulation. You can't light a fire that would destroy your night vision and make you an obvious target, so you rely on movement and layers of wool clothing to stay warm. Your fingers are getting numb, which is concerning because you need dexterity for archery. You tuck your hands into your armpits periodically, warming them, maintaining the manual dexterity that could be critical if threats actually materialize. Time passes slowly when you're cold, bored, and alone with your thoughts. You think about tomorrow's move, about the route you'll take and the new camping spot. You think about your family sleeping peacefully in the ger, trusting that you and the other guards are keeping them safe. You think about nothing in particular, letting your mind drift while maintaining the baseline vigilance that guard duty requires. Finally, you see movement your replacement approaching, slightly early, which is appreciated. You give him a brief report, nothing significant happened, wolves were distant, livestock are calm, everything is normal. He nods, takes up position, and you head back to your ger, relieved to be done with guard duty and ready to finally finally get some sleep. You push aside the felt door flap and step into your ger, and the temperature difference is immediately noticeable. The interior is significantly warmer than the outside, air not hot but comfortably mild, maintained by the combination of banked fire in the central hearth, body heat from sleeping family members, and the remarkable insulation properties of layered felt walls. After hours standing in the cold darkness, the warmth feels like a physical embrace, and you pause just inside the entrance to let your body adjust. The fire in the central hearth has been carefully maintained throughout the evening, not blazing, which would waste fuel and create too much heat, but a steady glow of coals that provides consistent warmth and allows for quick fire building if needed. Your wife or one of the older children likely added fuel before sleeping, a routine task that keeps the ger comfortable overnight. The smoke rises naturally through the circular opening at the crown of the roof, drawn upward by the natural convection that occurs when warm air rises and cold air sinks. No smoke lingers inside the ventilation system that Mongol engineers refined over centuries is remarkably effective. Your eyes, adjusted to darkness outside, now need to readjust to the dim interior light. The fire's glow casts flickering shadows on the felt walls, creating a play of light and dark that's almost hypnotic. The wooden lattice framework that supports the felt covering is visible in places, a geometric pattern of intersecting wood pieces that can expand or contract, making the entire structure adjustable. This collapsible design is actually brilliant. The ger can be disassembled into component parts, loaded onto carts, transported, and reassembled at a new location in a matter of hours. The spatial organization inside the ger isn't random, and you navigate it unconsciously, knowing exactly where things are even in dim light. The northern section opposite the door is the honored position where valuables are stored and important guests would sit. Your sleeping area is on the western side, following conventions that have governed ger organization for generations. The eastern side is for women's work wool processing equipment, cooking utensils, leatherworking tools. The southern section near the door is for younger family members and for items that need to be easily accessible when entering or exiting. A mainstream historical fact, the Mongol ger, also called yurt in Turkish languages, was such an effective portable housing design that it spread across Central Asian nomadic cultures with minimal modifications. The circular shape provides maximum interior space with minimum surface area, reducing heat loss. The felt, covering typically 3 to 5 layers, thick provides excellent insulation while remaining lightweight enough to transport. The framework can be adjusted to different diameters, creating gers ranging from small family units to massive structures used for gatherings or royal courts. Some of Genghis Khan's gers were reportedly so large they required dozens of oxen to transport. You remove your boots near the door. Trekking dirt into the sleeping area is simply not done, and your heavy outer deal hanging them on the wooden pegs that line the lattice walls. The interior deal you're wearing underneath is sufficient for sleeping. Your family members are already asleep, their breathing creating a gentle rhythm that's oddly comforting after the solitary silence of guard duty. Your wife is on your designated sleeping area, your children clustered nearby, your mother in her position on the honored northern side. Everyone has their place, and the arrangement feels right in ways that would be difficult to articulate but are deeply comfortable. The floor beneath your feet is layered felt overpacked earth, providing both cushioning and insulation from the cold ground. Additional sheepskins and felt mats create sleeping areas that are surprisingly comfortable despite the lack of modern bedding. The floor isn't perfectly levelly. You're on the step, not in a building with a concrete foundation, but the irregularities are minor and you've long since stopped noticing them. You can smell the interior atmosphere mixture of smoke, wool, leather, animal scent, and human habitation. It's not unpleasant if you're accustomed to it, which you are, having lived in gers your entire life. European visitors to Mongol camps often complained about the smell, finding it overwhelming, but that's because they were accustomed to different living conditions. You'd probably find their stone houses equally strangers. melling that damp, confined air quality of non-mobile dwellings. A quirky historical detail that surprises people, Mongol Gurs had remarkably sophisticated solutions to problems that sedentary architecture handles differently. The door always faced south, protecting against northern winds and maximizing solar heat gain during winter. The roof's circular opening could be partially covered with felt flaps, allowing precise ventilation control. Open more in summer, close partially in winter, adjust based on wind conditions. The lattice walls could be raised or lowered slightly, changing the gear's height and internal volume. These adjustments allowed the same structure to remain comfortable across seasons, with temperature ranges spanning more than 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You settle onto your sleeping area, pulling sheepskin coverings over yourself. Your wife stirs slightly but doesn't. Wait, she's accustomed to your guard duty returns and knows the routine. The felt beneath you is comfortable, yielding slightly to your body weight while providing firm support. Modern people might expect sleeping on the ground to be uncomfortable, but honestly, this is what you've known your entire life, and a proper felt mat with sheepskin covering is perfectly adequate for good sleep. The Gars design solves problems that sedentary people handle through completely different approaches. Temperature regulation? They build massive stone walls and fireplaces. You use layered felt and a central hearth with perfect ventilation. Structural stability? They dig foundations and build permanent frameworks. You use tension and compression in a collapsible design that's actually more stable in high winds than many rigid structures because it flexes rather than resisting. Space efficiency? They add rooms and build larger. You optimize the circle, which mathematically provides the most floor space for the least perimeter, and adjust your gur size to family needs. Historians still argue whether the Gur's design was primarily practical innovation or whether its circular form carried spiritual significance related to cosmological beliefs about the sky's dome and Earth's circle. The evidence suggests both factors mattered. The practical advantages are undeniable, but there's also abundant evidence that Mongols viewed the gear's shape as symbolically meaningful, representing cosmic order in microcosm. Maybe the best designs are ones where function and meaning align so perfectly that separating them becomes impossible. The warmth is working on you now, relaxing muscles that tensed up during cold guard duty. Your body is tired properly, satisfyingly tired from a full day of physical work and evening vigilance. Tomorrow brings the camp move, which will be exhausting in its own right, but tonight you're warm, safe, surrounded by family, inside a structure that's protected your people across countless generations. The felt walls around you represent a technology that's been refined over millennia, each generation making small improvements until the design reached a kind of perfection. This portable house can be packed and moved in hours, withstands extreme weather, maintains comfortable temperatures across seasons, and will last years with proper maintenance. Try accomplishing all that with your suburban stick frame construction. You close your eyes, listening to the gentle sounds of family breathing, the quiet crackle of the fire's last coals, the distant sounds of animals and night guards continuing their vigilance. The gur is warm, safe, and exactly where you belong. Sleep is pulling at you now, and you surrender to it willingly. You're hovering in that space between wakefulness and sleep, your body relaxed, but your mind still processing the day's experiences and the ambient sounds filtering through the felt walls. The steppe at night isn't silent. That's a misconception people have about wide open spaces, but rather filled with its own distinct soundscape, a layered composition of natural and domestic noises that creates a backdrop you've known your entire life. The wind is the constant presence, always moving across the grass in patterns that create sound variations. Sometimes it's a low whisper, barely perceptible, just the gentlest suggestion of air movement. Other times it picks up strength, creating a rushing sound as it encounters the gur's curved walls, sliding around the structure rather than hitting it directly. The circular design deflects wind efficiently, which is one reason gurs remain stable in conditions that would threaten square structures. You can hear the wind's strength in how the felt walls occasionally flutter slightly, held firm by the tension of the structure, but still responsive to strong gusts. The animals contribute their own sounds. The horses are mostly quiet, occasional snorts, or the soft thud of hooves when one shifts position. Horses sleep standing, so their nighttime sounds are minimal, just breathing, and the occasional whinny when something catches their attention. The sheep, clustered tight as always, make small sounds. The rustle of wool against wool, soft bleating from lambs calling for mothers, the general ambient presence of a large group of animals breathing and moving in small ways. A dog barks somewhere at the camp's edge, a brief warning that's not sustained enough to indicate serious threats. Probably something small, move at a rodent, a rabbit hand. The dog issued a pro forma alert before settling back into watch mode. The herding dogs patrol all night, their presence deterring predators and providing early warning of any approaching threats. You're so accustomed to occasional dog alerts that they don't wake you fully. Your brain registers the sound, assesses it as routine, and lets you continue towards sleep. The wolves howl again, those distant voices carrying across miles of empty grassland. They sound closer than before, maybe 3 miles instead of 5, but still not an immediate concern. Wolf packs have territories, and they generally avoid human settlements when easier prey is available. The howling serves multiple purposes: communication between pack members, territorial announcements to other wolves, social bonding within the pack. To you, it's just part of the night soundtrack, neither frightening nor particularly interesting, just wolves being wolves somewhere out in the darkness. Your wife's breathing beside you is steady and slow, the rhythm of deep sleep. Your children are equally peaceful, their smaller bodies generating surprising amounts of warmth under the sheepskin coverings. Family sleeping together isn't just emotional comfort, it's practical heat management. Multiple bodies in close proximity create a warm microclimate, reducing the fuel needed to maintain comfortable temperatures. Sedentary cultures with individual rooms and beds solve this differently, but the nomadic solution is elegant and efficient. A mainstream historical fact. Acoustic environments affect sleep quality, and humans actually sleep better with consistent ambient noise than in complete silence. The steppes, soundscape wind, animals. Distant sounds creates what modern sleep researchers would call white noise, masking sudden sounds that might otherwise wake sleepers. Mongols adapted to this acoustic environment so thoroughly that many found the silence of walled cities disturbing and complained of poor sleep when visiting sedentary civilizations. The fire in the central hearth is almost out now, just the faintest glow of coals, but you can hear it occasionally, the subtle settling of ash, the quiet hiss of residual heat. The fire will need tending in a few hours when the pre-dawn cold reaches its peak, but for now it provides just enough heat to maintain the gear's comfortable temperature. The smoke smell is faint, pleasant in the way that familiar scents are comforting even when they're not objectively good smells. Outside you can hear the night guard's footsteps, the soft, irregular rhythm of someone walking patrol around the camp. The sound is reassuring, confirmation that the security system is functioning, that someone is maintaining vigilance while you sleep. The guard's path takes him past your ger periodically, and you can track his circuit by the proximity of his footfalls. It's a sound you've heard thousands of nights, so familiar that its absence would be more noticeable than its presence. Something rustles near the gear's base, probably a small rodent. The steppe is full of them. They're clever little creatures, living in burrows, emerging at night to forage. They're mostly harmless, occasionally annoying when they get into stored food, and they're an important part of the ecosystem, feeding hawks, owls, foxes, and other predators. Your cat, who's curled up near the fire's dying warmth, makes a small sound. Not quite a meow, more like a chirp acknowledging the prey animal's presence, but apparently deciding it's not worth the effort of hunting. The cat's contribution to the household is keeping the rodent population manageable, a service you appreciate even if the cat's work ethic is questionable. The leather water bag hanging from a roof pole creaks slightly as the hide adjusts to temperature changes. Leather is a living material. In some sense, it continues to respond to humidity and temperature even after the animal's dead hand. It makes small sounds as it flexes and settles. The sound is barely perceptible, but in the quiet darkness, every small noise is audible. Far in the distance, you hear what might be other camps, a dog barking, maybe a horse whinnying. Sound carries remarkably far across the flat steppe, especially at night when other noise is minimal. You can't see these other camps in the darkness, but their acoustic presence reminds you that you're not isolated, that other families are living similar lives, maintaining similar routines, scattered across the landscape like stars scattered across the sky. Your breathing is slowing, deepening, matching the rhythm of sleep rather than wakefulness. The sounds around you are fading not because they've stopped, but because your consciousness is withdrawing from sensory input, turning inward toward dreams and rest. The steppe's night sounds continue their layered composition, wind and animals and human activity blending into a familiar symphony that's been playing across these grasslands for thousands of years. The last thing you're aware of before sleep claims you fully is the wind, that constant presence, moving across endless grass under endless stars, the same wind that shaped this landscape and its people for as long as anyone can remember. And then you're asleep, deeply and completely, as the night continues around you. Sleep on the steppe is different from sleep in permanent structures. There's a subtle awareness that never fully disappears, even in deep rest, a connection to the environment that sedentary people lose when they surround themselves with stone walls and locked doors. Your body knows it's sleeping in a portable shelter on open ground, and some part of your brain maintains a background monitoring system, processing sounds and environmental changes even while you dream. The dreams themselves are vivid tonight, mixing memories from the day with images that don't quite make sense in waking logic. You're riding across endless grass, the horse beneath you moving with that smooth gait that experienced steppe horses develop. The sky above is impossibly blue, and the horizon stretches forever in all directions. Your bow is in your hand, an arrow nocked, though you're not hunting anything specific, just ready, alert, moving through landscape that's simultaneously familiar and strange. The dream shifts, as dreams do, and now you're helping dismantle a gur, the felt walls coming down in sections, the lattice framework collapsing into transportable pieces. Everything fits together perfectly, each component designed to nest with others, and there's satisfaction in the efficiency of it all. Your children are there, helping with tasks appropriate to their sizes, and the work proceeds with the kind of dreamlike fluidity where complex jobs complete themselves effortlessly. You're aware, in that distant way of sleep, that hours are passing. The coldest part of night arrives, the pre-dawn period when temperatures drop to their lowest point and someone rises to tend the fire. You hear it happen without fully waking, the soft sounds of movement, the quiet addition of fuel to the hearth, the renewed warmth spreading through the gur. Then sleep claims you again, pulling you back into dreams that fade even as you experience them. The stars outside continue their slow rotation across the sky. The night guards change shifts, the tired replaced by the rested, the vigilance continuing without interruption. The livestock sleep or graze or stand in quiet alertness depending on species and temperament. The wind continues its eternal movement across grass that bends and recovers in patterns that have repeated for millennia. Your wife shifts beside you, pulling the sheepskin covering higher against the cold, and settles back into sleep without waking. Your children are deeply asleep in that profound way children have, their bodies completely relaxed, their breathing so steady and quiet they're barely perceptible. Your mother, in her position of honor on the northern side, sleeps the lighter sleep of age, waking periodically but finding everything calm and settling back into rest. The felt walls around you hold the warmth inside and keep the cold outside, creating a bubble of safety and comfort in the middle of vast, empty landscape. This portable architecture has sheltered your people through countless nights like this, one through storms and clear weather, through peaceful times and dangerous ones, through generations stretching back to ancestors whose names are remembered only in epic songs and oral traditions. Tomorrow you'll wake before dawn, start the fire fully, milk the mares, drink your fermented breakfast, and begin the process of moving this entire camp to new grazing. The gur you're sleeping in will be disassembled, loaded onto carts, and reconstructed at the new location. life will continue its mobile rhythm, the same patterns repeated daily, seasonally, generationally, in an unbroken chain of nomadic existence that's remarkably resilient and sustainable. But tonight, you're sleeping deeply, peacefully, surrounded by family, protected by felt walls and watchful guards and herding dogs. Your body is recovering from today's exertions, preparing for tomorrow's demands. Your mind is processing experiences, consolidating memories, dreaming dreams that blend reality and imagination into narratives that make sense only in sleep's private logic. And as the night deepens around you, as the stars trace their ancient patterns across the endless sky, your breathing becomes slower still, settling into the deepest rhythms of rest. The sounds of the steppe fade into background music, gentle and constant. The winds whisper through grass, the distant animal sounds, the soft settling of the fire. Everything is calm, peaceful, exactly as it should be. The felt walls embrace your sleeping family with warmth that's been woven into every fibre, protection that's been refined across countless generations. Outside, the guards maintain their watch, but you're safe, deeply safe, in this moment of perfect rest. Tomorrow's journey waits, but right now there's only the warmth, the darkness, the gentle sounds of night. Your mind drifts further into sleep's deepest waters, where thoughts dissolve into sensations, where time becomes meaningless, where the boundary between self and surroundings softens and blurs. The steppe breathes around you, ancient and patient, and you breathe with it, your rhythm matching the land's rhythm, becoming part of something much larger than individual consciousness. And there, in that deep place where sleep becomes almost dreamless, where the body rests most completely and the mind lets go of everything but the barest awareness of existence, you find the peace that every creature seeks at the end of day's labors. The felt walls hold you, the darkness embraces you, the eternal steppe surrounds you with its patient, endless presence. Sleep well, traveler. The morning will come soon enough, with all its activities and demands. But for now, for these precious hours of darkness, there's nothing required of you except rest. Just rest, deep and complete, under portable felt and infinite stars, in the embrace of ancient traditions and the security of community. Everything is exactly as it needs to be. You are safe. You are home. You are deeply, peacefully, completely asleep.